The needle slipped, and Clara Whitlock barely felt it pierce her thumb. She'd stopped noticing pain months ago. Around her, the cramped back room of Mrs. Kettering's dress shop smelled like starch and desperation, her own, mostly. The other seamstresses had gone home hours ago, but Clara stayed, hunched over a wedding dress that would never be hers, stitching beads onto silk she'd never wear. 26 years old and already a ghost. That's what she'd become in Brass Creek, Montana. A woman too plain to marry, too poor to matter, too stubborn to die quietly. "Clara!" Mrs. Kettering's voice cut through the silence like a blade. "You're still here?" "Just finishing the hemline, ma'am." "Well, hurry it up. I'm not paying you for candlelight." Clara didn't respond. Mrs. Kettering never paid her fairly anyway. $3 a week for 12-hour days, 6 days a week. Barely enough to keep herself fed and her guardian Anne in medicine. Anne, who'd taken her in 18 years ago when Clara's parents died of fever. Anne, who was now dying herself, coughing blood into handkerchiefs that Clara washed every morning before work. The arithmetic was simple and brutal. Anne had maybe 3 months left. The medicine cost $2 a week. Clara's rent was another $1. That left nothing for food, nothing for coal, nothing for the future that was coming, whether she was ready or not. She tied off the final stitch and bit the thread with her teeth. The dress would make some rancher's daughter look like an angel tomorrow. Clara would watch from the back of the church, invisible as always, then return to her windowless room and Anne's rattling coughs. "I'm done, ma'am." Mrs. Kettering inspected the work with narrowed eyes, looking for flaws she could dock pay for. Finding none, she gave a curt nod. "Tomorrow, 8 sharp. The Henderson girl needs her riding habit adjusted." Clara gathered her shawl, thin wool, nearly threadbare, and stepped into the November cold. Brass Creek's main street was empty, just frozen mud and the warm glow of the saloon, where men who actually had money wasted it on cards and whiskey. She'd never been inside. Decent women didn't. Not that anyone in this town considered her decent anyway. "Binster," she'd heard Mrs. Henderson call her last week. "Probably barren, too. Look at how narrow her hips are." Clara had kept her eyes down and kept sewing. What else could she do? Fight? Argue? She had no family name to defend, no prospects to protect. She was already at the bottom. The only direction left was down into the ground, which was where she'd be once Anne died, and Mrs. Kettering found a younger, cheaper seamstress to replace her. The boarding house smelled like boiled cabbage and mildew. Clara climbed the stairs to the 3rd floor, where the poorest tenants lived, and unlocked the door to the room she shared with Anne. Anne was awake, propped up on pillows, her face the color of old paper. "You're late." "Mrs. Kettering had me finish a rush job." Clara hung her shawl and moved to the small stove, where a pot of weak broth sat cold. She'd made it that morning from a ham bone she'd begged off the butcher. "Let me heat this up for you. I'm not hungry. You need to eat." "What I need," Anne said, her voice sharp despite its weakness, "is for you to stop pretending everything's fine." Clara's hand stilled on the pot. "I'm not pretending anything." "We're dying, Clara, both of us, just at different speeds." Anne coughed, a wet, horrible sound. "When I'm gone, what happens to you?" "I'll manage." "How? On $3 a week? You can barely afford my medicine now, and once I'm dead, Mrs. Kettering will cut your pay. She only keeps you because you're desperate enough to work cheap." Anne's eyes, still sharp despite everything, fixed on Clara. "You need to marry." Clara almost laughed. "Who exactly would have me?" "Someone. Anyone. There are more men than women out here. Find a widower who needs help with his children, a miner who wants someone to cook, and who wants a wife with no dowry, no family, no prospects?" Clara's voice rose despite herself. "I'm not stupid, Anne. I know what I am. I'm the woman people hire when they need sewing done, and forget the moment I leave the room." Anne was quiet for a long moment. Then, "Your mother was beautiful. Did I ever tell you that?" "Yes." "And your father was clever. You got his brains and her stubbornness, but somehow missed getting either of their faces." Anne's brutal honesty would have hurt if it wasn't simply true. "But you're alive, Clara. And as long as you're alive, you can fight." "Fight for what? There's nothing to fight for." "Then you're already dead." Clara turned back to the stove, blinking hard. She wouldn't cry. Tears were another luxury she couldn't afford. The next 3 weeks followed the same pattern: work, home, sleep, work again. And got worse. The medicine stopped helping. Clara counted her remaining dollars and did calculations that never came out right. Then came the night that changed everything. Clara was walking home later than usual. Mrs. Kettering had kept her until past 9, finishing alterations for a dance, when she heard voices from the alley beside the boarding house. Men's voices, tense and urgent. She should have kept walking. Women who investigated strange noises in dark alleys were fools. But something made her pause, some instinct she didn't know she had. "Not taking you to a doctor," one man was saying. "You know what you said. When it's time, it's time." "Time's not yet." This voice was rougher, thick with pain. "Need to get inside. Need to—" A cough, harsh and wet, worse than Anne's. Clara peered around the corner. 2 men stood in the alley. One was young, maybe 20, dressed like a ranch hand. The other was older, 40, maybe 50, hard to tell in the darkness, and leaning heavily against the wall. Even in the dim light, Clara could see blood on his lips. "Rowan, you can't climb stairs like this. Let me get the doc." "No doctors." The older man, Rowan, straightened with visible effort. "Told you, Jacob. I came to town for one reason. Need to find someone before—" Another cough, more blood. Clara should have left, should have walked away from whatever tragedy was unfolding here. But something about the older man's face, visible now in the lamplight, stopped her. It wasn't a kind face or a handsome one. It was harsh and weathered, carved by wind and sun into something almost brutal. But his eyes, when they caught the light, held something she recognized: desperation. She stepped into the alley. Both men's heads snapped toward her. The younger one, Jacob, moved his hand toward his belt, where a knife handle protruded. The older one just looked at her, his gaze sharp despite his obvious pain. "You need help," Clara said. It wasn't a question. "We need nothing from you, ma'am," Jacob said quickly. "Sorry to disturb you. We'll be moving along." But Rowan didn't move. He studied Clara with an intensity that should have been uncomfortable but somehow wasn't. "You live here?" "3rd floor." "Alone?" "With my guardian. She's sick." "So am I." Rowan smiled, and it wasn't pleasant. "Difference is, she might get better. I won't." Jacob looked stricken. "Rowan—" "Shut up, Jacob." Rowan's eyes never left Clara. "What's your name?" "Clara Whitlock." "You married Clara Whitlock?" The question was so unexpected, so absurd given the circumstances, that Clara almost laughed. "No." "Promised to anyone?" "No." "Good." Rowan pushed himself off the wall, swaying slightly. "I need to speak with you, privately, tomorrow." "I work during the day." "When do you finish?" 6 o'clock, but I don't see why—" "The gold dust, 6:30. It wasn't a request. Rowan turned to Jacob. "Get me to the hotel. I'm done for tonight." Jacob shot Clara an apologetic look as he helped Rowan stumble back toward the street. "Sorry, ma'am. He's not usually this rude. He's just dying," Rowan interrupted. "The word is dying, Jacob. No point dancing around it." Clara watched them disappear into the darkness, her heart beating strangely fast. She should forget this encounter, forget the blood on that man's lips and the desperate calculation in his eyes. But she didn't. The Gold Dust was the nicest hotel in Brass Creek, which meant it had clean floors and didn't smell too strongly of livestock. Clara had never been inside. She arrived at 6:30 exactly, still in her work dress, which was the only dress she owned besides her Sunday one. The desk clerk looked at her like she'd tracked in mud. "Can I help you?" "I'm meeting someone. Mr. Rowan." She realized she didn't know his last name. "Heir, room 7, upstairs." "Though I should warn you, ma'am, mister, Heir isn't receiving female visitors in the usual sense. If you're looking for work of that nature—" Clara felt her face heat. "I'm not." "Of course not." The clerk's tone said he didn't believe her. "Upstairs, first door on the left." She climbed the stairs on shaking legs, telling herself she could still leave. This was insane. Meeting a strange man in a hotel room. If anyone saw her, her reputation, what little she had, would be destroyed. But what reputation? What did she have to lose? She knocked. Come in. Rowan Hale sat in a chair by the window, looking somehow worse in good light. His face was gaunt, his skin gray, but his eyes were alert, tracking her every movement as she entered and closed the door behind her. Sit. He gestured to the other chair. Clara sat. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. Rowan studied her with that same intense focus from last night, and Clara forced herself to meet his gaze. Whatever this was, she wouldn't face it cowering. Finally, Rowan said, "How old are you?" 26. Ever been with a man? Clara's face burned. That's none of your business. It is if I'm considering making you an offer. Rowan leaned forward slightly. I need a straight answer, Clara Whitlock. Have you ever been with a man? No. Can you ride a horse? The shift in questions threw her. A little. Shoot a gun? No. Hunt? Trap? Skin a deer? No, no. And no, Mr. Hale, I'm a seamstress, not a you can sew. That's useful. Rowan sat back, wincing slightly. What about reading and writing? I can do both. Better and better. He was quiet for another moment, then, I'm going to make you an offer, Miss Whitlock. It's going to sound insane. You're going to want to refuse. But before you do, I want you to think very carefully about your situation. Clara's hands tightened on the arms of her chair. What kind of offer? Marriage. The word hung in the air between them, absurd and impossible. Clara blinked. You want to marry me? Yes. Why? Because I'm dying and I need an heir. Rowan's voice was flat, matter-of-fact. I have land, Miss Whitlock. Good land. 1,500 acres in the high mountains, with a cabin, outbuildings, trap lines worth their weight in gold, and more game than you've ever seen. I've spent 23 years building something worth keeping, and I'll be damned if I let it all go back to wilderness when I die. You could leave it to Jacob. Jacob's a good boy, but he's not blood. Law being what it is, some distant cousin I've never met would end up with everything. Rowan coughed, harsh and wet. When he lowered his hand, there was blood on it. I don't have much time, Miss Whitlock. Maybe 3 months, maybe 6 if I'm unlucky. I need a wife, and I need a child. In that order. Clara felt like she'd been slapped. You want me to give you a child? I want you to give me an heir. There's a difference. Not much of one. Here's the difference. I'm offering you everything. The land, the cabin, the trap lines, everything. Marry me, bear my child, and when I die, it's all yours. You and the child can stay there, build a life, or you can sell it and move to California. I don't care. But the child, my child, inherits. Clara's mind reeled. This was madness. Marry a dying stranger? Have his child? Live alone in the mountains? Why me? She managed. Because you're desperate. Rowan's brutal honesty cut like a knife. I've been watching you, Miss Whitlock, asked around about you. You're unmarried, poor, caring for a dying woman. You work 12-hour days for barely enough to survive. When your guardian dies, you'll have nothing. No family, no prospects, no future. In 6 months, maybe less, you'll be living in a brothel or starving in the street. Every word was true, and Clara hated him for saying it out loud. I'm offering you a way out, Rowan continued. It won't be easy. The land is harsh, and I'll work you hard teaching you what you need to know. But you'll survive, Miss Whitlock. You and your child will survive. That's more than you can say about your current situation. Clara's throat was tight. What if I can't have children? Then I'll die and you'll still inherit. The marriage contract will be ironclad. What if I refuse? Then I'll find another desperate woman, and you'll go back to your sewing. Rowan's eyes never wavered. But we both know you won't refuse, because I'm offering you the one thing you can't get anywhere else. What's that? A future. The word echoed in the small room. A future. Clara thought of Anne's rattling coughs, of Mrs. Kettering's pinched face, of the endless days stretching ahead into nothing. She thought of the widow's home where she'd likely end her days. Or worse, the brothel that took in women with nowhere else to go. I need time to think, she said. You have 24 hours. I'm leaving for my land the day after tomorrow, with or without a wife. Rowan stood, moving like every bone in his body hurt. Think carefully, Miss Whitlock. This offer won't come again. Clara fled. She didn't sleep that night. Instead, she sat beside Anne's bed and listened to her guardian's labored breathing. "You're thinking too loud," Anne said finally. "Sorry." "What happened?" Clara hesitated, then told her everything. The meeting, the offer, all of it. When she finished, Anne was quiet for a long time. "Take it," Anne said finally. "What?" "Take his offer, Clara. Marry him." "He's a stranger, a dying stranger who wants me to—" Clara couldn't finish the sentence. "He's offering you land, property, independence." Anne's voice gained strength. "Do you understand what that means? You'd own something, Clara. Not just survive, but own. Build. That's worth more than any respectable marriage to some shopkeeper who'd work you to death and leave you nothing when he's gone. But to have a child with a man I don't love. Love?" Anne laughed, and it turned into a cough. "Clara, wake up. Love doesn't feed you. Love doesn't keep you warm. I loved your parents, and when they died, I had nothing. I've spent my whole life with nothing. Don't make the same mistake. You took me in. And look where it got us. Both dying slowly in a room that smells like death." Anne grabbed Clara's hand with surprising strength. "I'm going to be dead in weeks, maybe days, but you're still alive. So be alive, Clara. Take what that man is offering and fight for it." Clara's eyes burned. "I'm scared." "Good. Fear means you're paying attention." Anne squeezed her hand. "Now go. Accept his offer before he finds someone braver." Clara returned to the gold dust the next evening. Rowan opened the door before she could knock. "Well?" "I'll do it." Something that might have been relief flickered across Rowan's harsh face. "Smart woman. We'll marry tomorrow at noon. I've already spoken to the circuit judge. Pack whatever you need to bring. We leave at dawn the next day." "I need to give Mrs. Kettering notice." "No." Rowan's voice was flat. "You leave with me, or the deal's off. I don't have time for you to tie up loose ends." Clara swallowed. "My guardian—" "I'll pay for her care. 3 months at the boarding house, medicine included. After that—" He shrugged. "She'll be dead, and you'll be gone. Clean break." It was cruel and practical and exactly right. Clara nodded slowly. "All right. One more thing." Rowan pulled out a folded paper. "This is the marriage contract. Read it carefully. Once you sign, there's no backing out." Clara took the paper with shaking hands. The contract was surprisingly simple. Marriage between Rowan Hale and Clara Whitlock. Duration? Until death of Rowan Hale. Terms: Clara Whitlock to cohabit with Rowan Hale and bear one child. Upon Rowan Hale's death, all property transfers to Clara Hale and child. Clara Hale may not remarry while child is under age of majority. Should Clara Hale fail to bear a child, property still transfers upon Rowan Hale's death. At the bottom was a line for her signature. "The lawyer's downstairs," Rowan said. "He'll witness it." Clara's hand trembled as she signed her name. The ink looked like blood. The wedding was quick and cold. The circuit judge performed it in his room at the hotel, with Jacob and the lawyer as witnesses. Clara wore her Sunday dress, which had a torn hem she hadn't had time to fix. Rowan wore the same clothes he'd been wearing every time she'd seen him. "Do you, Rowan Hale, take this woman?" The words washed over Clara like cold water. This wasn't how she'd imagined getting married, back when she'd been young enough to imagine such things. No church, no flowers, no family. Just a dying man and a desperate woman making a transaction. "Pronounce you man and wife." Rowan didn't kiss her. He just nodded once, signed the marriage certificate, and turned to Jacob. "We leave at dawn. Make sure the horses are ready." That night, Clara lay in her shared room with Anne one last time. Anne was barely conscious, her breathing shallow. "I'm leaving tomorrow," Clara whispered. Anne's eyes opened slightly. "Good. I'm scared." "Be scared later. Right now, survive." Clara kissed Anne's forehead. It was burning hot. "Thank you for everything." "Thank you for not being boring." Anne smiled, just slightly. "Now go. Build something worth remembering." Those were the last words they exchanged. When Clara left at dawn, Anne was sleeping. She would be dead within a week. Clara would learn about it months later in a letter from the boarding house keeper that found its way to the mountains. But that was later. Right now, Clara stood in the gray pre-dawn light outside the hotel, wearing her work dress and carrying a single bag with everything she owned. Rowan sat on a horse, looking slightly less gray in the dim light. Jacob held the reins of a second horse. "You ride?" Rowan asked. "A little." "You'll learn more. Mount up." Clara had ridden exactly twice in her life, both times on a gentle mare at a church picnic. This horse was not gentle. It skittered sideways as she approached, and she had to try 3 times before she managed to get her foot in the stirrup and haul herself into the saddle. Rowan watched without offering to help. When she was finally seated, he turned his horse toward the mountains. "We've got a long ride. Keep up." They rode out of Brass Creek as the sun rose, Clara's last view of civilization disappearing behind them. She didn't look back. There was nothing there worth seeing. Charmed. The first day in the saddle was agony. By noon, Clara's legs were cramping. By evening, she could barely walk. They made camp in a small clearing, and Clara half fell off her horse, her legs giving out when she tried to stand. "You'll toughen up," Rowan said, not unkindly. He moved around the campsite with practiced efficiency, despite his obvious pain. "Jacob, get a fire going. Clara, there's a creek about 50 yards that way. Get water." Clara took the bucket he handed her and stumbled toward the sound of running water. Her whole body ached. Her hands were blistered from holding the reins. Her back felt like it might snap. "What have I done?" The creek was cold and clear. Clara filled the bucket, then sat on the bank for a moment, staring at her reflection in the water. She looked like a stranger, pale, drawn, exhausted. A branch cracked behind her. Clara spun, her heart jumping. A deer stood at the far edge of the clearing, watching her with dark, liquid eyes. "Don't move." Rowan's voice was barely a whisper. Clara froze. From the corner of her eye, she saw him raise a rifle, aim, fire. The deer dropped. "Come on," Rowan said, already moving toward the fallen animal. "You're about to learn how to dress a deer." What followed was the most gruesome hour of Clara's life. Rowan showed her step by step how to field dress the animal, cutting, pulling, removing organs that steamed in the cold air. Clara's stomach heaved, but Rowan's eyes were on her, watching, judging. "You're going to do this yourself eventually," he said. "Might as well start learning now." By the time they were done, Clara's hands were covered in blood up to her elbows. She wanted to vomit. She wanted to cry. She wanted to run back to Brass Creek and beg Mrs. Kettering for her job back, but she did none of those things. She washed her hands in the creek and came back to the fire, where Jacob was cooking strips of venison. "Eat," Rowan said, handing her a tin plate. "You'll need your strength." The meat was tough and gamey, nothing like the carefully roasted Sunday meals she'd known. But Clara was starving, and she ate every bite. That night she lay in her bedroll staring up at stars so bright they seemed close enough to touch. The mountains loomed around them, massive and indifferent. Somewhere in the darkness, something howled. A wolf, maybe, or something worse. Rowan lay near the fire, his breathing harsh and uneven. Jacob sat watch, rifle across his lap. "You did all right today," Rowan said suddenly. Clara turned her head. "I couldn't even walk." "But you didn't quit. That's what matters." He was quiet for a moment. "Most women would have quit by now. Run crying back to town." "I almost did." "But you didn't." Rowan coughed, and Clara heard the blood in it. "You'll do, Clara Hale. You'll do just fine." It was the first time he'd called her by her new name, Clara Hale. She tested it silently, feeling how it sat on her tongue. She didn't hate it. Oh. They rode for 5 more days. Each day, Clara learned something new. How to hobble a horse, how to find north by the stars, how to tell edible plants from poisonous ones. Each day, her body adapted, the blisters on her hands hardening into calluses, the ache in her legs fading to a dull throb. And each day, Rowan got worse. By the 4th day, he was coughing blood almost constantly. Jacob watched him with growing worry, but Rowan waved off all concerns. "I'll make it home," he said. "That's all that matters." On the 6th day, they climbed into higher elevations, and the temperature dropped sharply. Snow appeared in patches, then grew thicker. Clara's thin coat was useless. She shivered constantly, her teeth chattering. At noon, Rowan reined in his horse. There! Clara looked up and saw smoke rising from a narrow valley below. As they descended, a cabin came into view, larger than she'd expected, built from logs with a stone chimney. Outbuildings clustered around it, a barn, a smokehouse, something that might have been a forge. Home, Rowan said simply. The cabin's interior was sparse but solid. One main room with a massive fireplace, a kitchen area, a loft above. Two smaller rooms branched off, one clearly Rowan's, the other empty. You'll take the spare room, Rowan said. For now. Jacob started a fire while Rowan showed Clara around. The cabin was well stocked. Sacks of flour and cornmeal, cured meat hanging from the rafters, shelves of jarred vegetables. Everything a person would need to survive a harsh winter. I've been preparing, Rowan said, making sure whoever came after me would have what they needed. He looked at Clara. That's you now. Over the next 2 weeks, Rowan taught Clara everything he could. How to set trap lines, how to read weather in the sky, how to smoke meat, how to shoot. Clara's hands, soft from years of sewing, grew hard and scarred. She learned to ignore cold that would have left her weeping in Brass Creek. She learned to butcher animals without flinching, to skin rabbits with quick, efficient movements. And at night, in Rowan's bed, she learned other things. Their physical relationship was strange and awkward at first. Rowan was patient in his way, but there was no romance, no pretense of love. They were fulfilling the terms of a contract, nothing more, except sometimes, in the dark, Rowan would tell her stories. About the mountains, about the years he'd spent alone, about why he'd come here in the first place. I was running, he said one night. From what? Doesn't matter anymore. Point is, I got here and realized I was free, truly free. Nobody telling me what to do, nobody judging me, just me and the mountains. Were you lonely? Claire asked. Sometimes, but loneliness is better than being trapped. He was quiet. I thought about going back once. Then I realized I'd built something here, something worth keeping. Is that why you wanted an heir? Partly, but also, he hesitated. I wanted to know my life meant something, that I'd leave more than just a pile of bones in the woods. Clara understood that. She thought of her own life, the years of invisible drudgery in Brass Creek. I don't want to be forgotten either. Then don't be forgettable. Rowan's hand found hers in the dark. Build something, Clara. Make them remember you. 6 weeks after they arrived, Clara realized she was pregnant. She told Rowan that evening. He nodded slowly, something like satisfaction crossing his face. Good. That's good. He coughed, harder than usual. Means I can die knowing I did what I came to do. Don't talk like that. Why not? It's true. Rowan looked at her. I'm not afraid of dying, Clara. I'm afraid of dying for nothing. But now, he touched her stomach gently. Now I've left something behind. Over the next weeks, Rowan's condition deteriorated rapidly. He could barely walk without help. Jacob wanted to fetch a doctor from town, but Rowan refused. Doctors can't fix what's broken in me, he said. Besides, I'm not dying in some stinking sick room. I'm dying here, in my own bed. Clara found herself caring for him with a tenderness that surprised her. This man who'd bargained for her like livestock, who'd worked her until her hands bled, who'd taken her body with clinical efficiency. Somewhere along the way, he'd become something more than a transaction. Not love, exactly, but something. Read to me, Rowan said one evening. He had a small collection of books, mostly practical manuals, but a few novels. Clara chose one at random and read aloud by firelight. Rowan listened with his eyes closed. You've got a good voice, he said when she paused. The child will like hearing it. How do you know? Because I do. It was the closest he'd come to a declaration of affection. Clara's throat tightened and she kept reading. Winter came early and hard. Snow piled up around the cabin and the temperature dropped until water froze solid overnight. Clara was 3 months pregnant now, her belly just starting to show. She ran the trap lines alone now, since Rowan couldn't leave his bed. Jacob helped when he could, but he had his own homestead to worry about, 10 miles down the valley. You're doing good, Jacob told her one day as they checked traps together. Rowan chose right. Did he? Yeah, most women would have run screaming by now, but you're still here, still fighting. Jacob pulled a frozen marten from a trap. That's what it takes to survive out here, not strength or skill, stubbornness. Clara smiled slightly. I've got that in spades. I noticed. That night, Rowan's fever spiked. Clara sat beside his bed, wiping his forehead with cool water while he muttered and thrashed. The child, he said suddenly, his eyes focusing on her. Promise me. Promise what? That you'll teach them. Everything I taught you. Promise. I promise. And promise you'll stay. Build a life here. Don't run back to civilization and sell my land to some banker. I promise, Rowan. Say it. Say you'll stay. I'll stay. I swear it. Rowan relaxed slightly. Good. That's good. His eyes drifted closed. You're stronger than you know, Clara Hale. Stronger than I ever was. That's not true. It is. I ran to the mountains. You're running toward them. Big difference. Clara didn't understand what he meant, but it didn't matter. Rowan had fallen asleep, his breathing slightly easier. The contractions started on a night when the temperature had dropped to 20 below zero. Clara had been asleep in Rowan's bed. She slept there every night now, partly to care for him, partly because the shared warmth helped them both survive the cold. The pain woke her like a knife in her belly. For a moment, Clara didn't understand what was happening. Then another contraction hit, harder, and she realized with cold terror the baby was coming. Rowan, she shook him. Rowan, wake up. His eyes opened, clouded with fever. What? The baby. It's coming. Whatever fog the fever had created burned away instantly. Rowan struggled to sit up. How far apart are the contractions? I don't know. Close. Damn. Rowan's mind was working despite his body's weakness. All right, listen to me carefully. There's a chest in the corner. Bring it here. Everything we need is inside. Clara stumbled across the room, gritting her teeth through another contraction. The chest contained clean linen, scissors, twine, a bottle of whiskey. Good girl. Now get on the bed. We're going to do this together. The next hours were a blur of pain and terror. The contractions came faster, harder, until Clara couldn't tell where one ended and another began. She'd heard women talk about childbirth in hushed whispers, but nothing had prepared her for this. Something's wrong, she gasped between contractions. Something's wrong, Rowan. Rowan's face was grim. He was examining her with hands that shook from weakness but remained steady through sheer force of will. Baby's breech. Coming feet first. Clara's terror crystallized into something cold and absolute. Women died from breech births. She was going to die here, in this cabin, with her child trapped inside her. No, Rowan said, as if reading her mind. You're not dying, not on my watch. Listen to me, Clara. We're going to turn this baby. How? Trust me. What followed was agony beyond anything Clara had experienced. Rowan's hands pressed and manipulated, trying to turn the baby manually. Clara screamed. She'd been taught that decent women bore pain silently, but there was nothing decent about this, nothing civilized. This was primal, animal, pure survival. That's it, Rowan said. I can feel the head now. One more push. Come on, Clara. You're the strongest woman I've ever met. Prove it. Clara pushed. Something tore inside her, and the pain went white hot. Then suddenly, shockingly, it lessened. She heard a wet sound, then a thin, angry wail. It's a boy, Rowan said. His voice shook. You have a son, Clara. Clara reached for the baby with trembling hands. Rowan placed him on her chest, a tiny, red, screaming thing covered in blood and vernix. The most beautiful thing Clara had ever seen. Ethan, she whispered. His name is Ethan. Rowan cut and tied the cord with practiced efficiency, then cleaned the baby while Clara delivered the afterbirth. When everything was done, he collapsed back in his chair, gray-faced and shaking. You did it, he said. Against all odds, you did it. Clara held Ethan close, feeling his tiny heartbeat against her chest. We did it. For the first time since their wedding, Rowan smiled, really smiled. Yeah, we did. Well, 3 days later, Rowan died. He went peacefully, in his sleep, with Clara and his son beside him. When Clara woke and realized he wasn't breathing, she felt something crack inside her chest. She told herself this was just a transaction, that Rowan was nothing more than a means to an end. But as she sat there, holding his cold hand, she realized the truth. Somewhere in the brutal process of survival, she'd come to care for this harsh, dying man who'd given her a future. Jacob helped her bury Rowan on a ridge overlooking the valley. They carved his name into a wooden cross, Rowan Heir, 1837 to 1883. He built something worth keeping. Clara stood at the grave long after Jacob left, Ethan bundled against her chest. The wind howled around her, bitter and cold. Winter was far from over. She had months of isolation ahead, alone with a newborn in the wilderness. She should have been terrified. But as she looked out over the snow-covered valley, over the cabin and the trap lines and the forest beyond, Clara felt something else entirely. She felt free. This was hers now. All of it. No one could take it from her. No Mrs. Kettering to underpay her. No landladies to evict her. No society to judge her. Just her and her son and the mountains. "Your father was right," she whispered to Ethan. "This is worth keeping." The baby fussed, cold and hungry. Clara turned back toward the cabin. There was work to do. Traps to check, wood to chop, a child to feed. The mountains didn't care that she'd just given birth. Didn't care that she was grieving. Didn't care that she was exhausted. But neither did Clara care about the mountains' indifference. She would survive. More than survive. She would thrive. Because she'd made a promise to a dying man. Because she'd signed her name in ink and blood. Because she refused to be forgettable. Clara Hale walked back to her cabin as snow began to fall. Behind her, the grave stood silent on its ridge. Ahead, smoke rose from the chimney. Her home, her future. The mountains had tested her and found her worthy. Now came the hard part, proving them right. The first week alone nearly broke her. Not the physical work. Clara had expected that to be brutal. What she hadn't expected was the silence, the absolute crushing weight of being the only human voice for miles. She'd wake in the night to Ethan's crying and realize that no one was coming to help. No neighbor would stop by. No doctor could be fetched. If something went wrong, she would handle it alone or they would both die. On the 8th day, she ran out of firewood. Clara stared at the dwindling pile by the hearth, Ethan strapped to her chest in a sling she'd fashioned from one of Rowan's old shirts. The temperature outside was 10 below. The wind howled like something alive and hungry, and she had maybe 6 hours of wood left. "Well," she said to Ethan, who was mercifully asleep, "your father would probably laugh at me right now." She bundled herself in every layer she owned, wrapped Ethan in furs until only his tiny face showed, and stepped outside. The cold hit like a fist. Clara's breath froze in her lungs, and for a moment she couldn't move. Then Ethan stirred against her chest, and that small movement jolted her forward. The woodpile was behind the cabin where Rowan and Jacob had stacked split logs before the first snow, but that pile was buried now under 4 feet of drift. Clara grabbed the shovel and started digging. Her hands, still healing from childbirth, screamed in protest. Her back. She shouldn't have been doing this kind of work so soon, she knew that. But should and could were different things, and right now she could dig or she could freeze. It took 3 hours to clear enough snow to reach the wood. By then, Clara's hands were bleeding through her gloves. Her face felt like frozen leather, and Ethan was starting to fuss. She loaded her arms with logs, staggered back inside, and dumped them by the hearth. Then she went back for more. 6 trips. On the last one, her legs gave out halfway to the door. Clara fell hard, logs scattering across the snow. For a long moment, she just lay there, face down in the drift, too exhausted to move. "Get up," said a voice in her head. It sounded like Rowan. "Get up, or you're dead." Clara got up. That night, feeding the fire with her hard-won logs, she looked down at Ethan nursing at her breast and felt something shift inside her. She'd survived today. Tomorrow there would be new problems. There always were, but she'd survived today. "Your father was right about one thing," she told Ethan. "Stubborn beats strong every time." The next morning, Jacob arrived. Clara heard the horse before she saw it and grabbed Rowan's rifle from above the door. She'd been practicing her shooting, but her aim was still terrible. Didn't matter. If someone was coming to take her land, she'd fight for it. But it was just Jacob leading a pack horse loaded with supplies. "Figured you'd be running low," he said, dismounting. He looked at Clara, at her bloody hands, her gaunt face, the dark circles under her eyes. and his expression shifted to something like concern. Jesus, Clara, you look like death. I'm fine. You're not fine. When's the last time you slept? Clara tried to remember. 2 days ago? 3? Time had started blurring together. I sleep when Ethan sleeps. Which is what? 20 minutes at a time? Jacob started unloading supplies: flour, cornmeal, salt, coffee, luxuries. Clara hadn't realized how desperately she needed. You can't keep this up. You'll kill yourself. I don't have a choice. Yeah, you do. I can stay a few days, help you catch up on... No. Clara's voice came out sharper than she'd intended. I appreciate the offer, Jacob. I really do. But I need to learn how to do this myself. If I start depending on you every time things get hard, I'll never make it. Jacob studied her for a long moment. Then he nodded slowly. All right, but at least let me check your trap lines. Make sure they're still set proper. That much, Clara could accept. They spent the afternoon hiking the lines together, Jacob showing her which traps had sprung empty and how to reset them more effectively. Clara's legs burned from the exertion. Her body still hadn't fully recovered from childbirth, but she pushed through it. Weakness was a luxury she couldn't afford. You're learning fast, Jacob said as they worked. Rowan knew what he was doing when he picked you. Did he? Clara adjusted a trap's tension spring. Or was I just the most desperate woman in Brass Creek? Maybe both, Jacob grinned. But desperation's a good teacher, makes you pay attention. They checked 18 traps. 11 had caught nothing. 4 had frozen rabbits. 2 had martins, and 1, the last one, deep in a rocky ravine, had something else entirely. A wolf. Not a small one either. The animal was massive, easily 100 pounds, with silver-gray fur and eyes that tracked their approach with cold calculation. It had gotten its leg caught in the trap, but was very much alive. Clara froze. What do we do? Kill it. Obviously. Jacob unslung his rifle. Pelt's worth good money, and wolves are a menace to livestock. But something made Clara hesitate. The wolf wasn't snarling or lunging. It just watched them, panting, clearly in pain but eerily calm. Wait, she said. Jacob lowered his rifle slightly. Clara, you can't be thinking. Just wait. Clara approached slowly, her own rifle ready but not raised. The wolf's eyes followed her movement. Up close, she could see it was a female, lean from a hard winter. You're stuck, aren't you, girl? Clara, that thing will tear your throat out the second... No, she won't. Clara knelt, just out of reach. The wolf could have lunged at her, trap or no trap, but it didn't. She's not stupid. She knows I could kill her right now, but she's not giving up. Look at her. She's still trying to figure out how to survive this. Jacob made an exasperated sound. So what, you're going to free her out of the goodness of your heart? No, I'm going to free her because I understand her. Clara met the wolf's yellow eyes. We're both stuck somewhere we don't belong, trying to stay alive against long odds. Seems a shame to kill her for that. Rowan would have shot it. Rowan's dead. Clara's voice was flat. This is my land now, my decision. She approached the trap, moving slowly. The wolf tensed but didn't attack. With quick practice movements, thank you, Rowan, for those endless lessons, Clara released the spring. The trap opened. The wolf pulled its leg free, limped 3 steps away, then turned back. For a long moment, woman and wolf regarded each other. Then the wolf turned and disappeared into the trees. Jacob shook his head. You're either the bravest woman I've ever met, or the most foolish. Probably both. Clara reset the trap. Come on, we've got more to check. That night, Jacob left despite Clara's half-hearted protest that the weather was too rough for travel. She knew why he was really going. She needed to prove she could handle this alone. And she could, barely. But she could. The weeks crawled by. Clara developed a routine. Wake before dawn, feed Ethan, check the closest trap lines while he slept in his sling against her chest. Return home by mid-morning to feed him again. Use his afternoon nap to chop wood, haul water, prepare food. Feed him again at dusk. Spend the evening mending traps, cleaning pelts, and trying not to fall asleep standing up. Collapse into bed. Wake 3 times in the night when Ethan cried. Start over. It was exhausting and brutal, and somehow, impossibly, Clara found she didn't hate it. There was something clarifying about this life. No complicated social rules to navigate. No Mrs. Kettering judging her stitches. No polite conversations that meant nothing, just the simple equation of work and survival. But the isolation gnawed at her. Clara found herself talking to Ethan constantly, narrating everything she did. See, what you do is set the tension like this. Too loose and the animal gets away. Too tight and you destroy the pelt, which means no money, which means we starve. No pressure. Ethan, being 3 weeks old, responded by spitting up on her coat. Yeah, you're right. That was too much information. Let's try something else. How about I tell you about your father? Clara adjusted his sling as she walked. He was harsh. Probably the least sentimental man I've ever met. But he was fair. And when he promised something, he kept his word. You should try to be like that, minus the dying of lung disease part. The trees creaked in the wind. Snow fell in lazy spirals. Clara checked another trap, empty, and moved on. He loved this place, really loved it. Not the way people in town love things, where they say they love something, but they'd give it up for comfort or safety. He loved these mountains the way you love breathing. It wasn't optional. She paused. I'm starting to understand that. Another empty trap. Clara cursed under her breath. The catches had been sparse lately. At this rate, she wouldn't have enough pelts to sell when the trader came through in spring. Your father knew exactly how many pelts he needed to survive each year. 40 marten, minimum. 20 rabbits, 6 deer. I'm at, she calculated mentally, 18 marten, 7 rabbits, 2 deer. We're behind, Ethan. We're really behind. As if in response to her worry, the next trap had caught a beautiful marten, and the one after that. And the one after that. Clara found herself laughing, giddy with relief, as she collected them. Okay, I take it back. Maybe the mountain's like us, after all. She was resetting the 4th trap when she heard it, a low, rumbling growl. Clara's hand went to the rifle slung across her back, but she didn't pull it free. She turned slowly. The silver wolf stood 20 feet away. For a long moment, neither moved. The wolf's leg had healed, Clara noted with satisfaction. No limp. She'd survived the trap after all. Hello again, Clara said quietly. Come to check on us? The wolf tilted its head, regarding Clara with those unsettling yellow eyes. Then, impossibly, it sat down. Clara blinked. You're not going to attack? The wolf just watched. All right then. Clara finished resetting the trap, very aware of the animal's presence. You're welcome to keep me company, I suppose. Not like I've got a lot of conversation options out here. She moved to the next trap. The wolf followed, keeping a careful distance. This became a pattern. Every few days when Clara worked the southern trap line, the silver wolf would appear. She never got closer than 15 feet. She never threatened. She just accompanied Clara, like some kind of strange guardian. Clara told herself it was ridiculous to feel comforted by a wild predator's presence. But the truth was, she did. The wolf was something alive out here besides herself and Ethan, proof that they weren't completely alone. I should give you a name, Clara said one day. The wolf was following her through a particularly treacherous section of trail where ice made every step a gamble. Can't keep calling you the wolf forever. How about Silver? No, too obvious. Luna? Too fancy. You're not a fancy wolf. The wolf's ears flicked forward. What about Ghost? Clara tested the name. You appear and disappear like one. And you're silver white, which fits. She glanced back. Ghost? Yeah. That works. The wolf, Ghost, made a soft chuffing sound that Clara chose to interpret as approval. February came, and with it, a thaw. For 3 days, the temperature rose above freezing. Snow melted, turning the world into a slushy nightmare. Then the temperature plummeted again, and everything froze solid. The trails became treacherous sheets of ice. Clara fell twice in one morning, the second time hard enough that she saw stars. We need to stay close to the cabin until this melts, she told Ethan that evening. Your mother's not coordinated enough for ice climbing. But staying close to the cabin meant shorter trap lines, which meant fewer catches, which meant less money for supplies. Clara stared at her dwindling stack of pelts and did math she didn't like. At this rate, she might not make it to spring. And even if she did, she'd be starting the warm season with almost no reserves. One bad summer, one poor hunting season, and they'd be right back on the edge of starvation. I need help, she thought. Then immediately, no. You can do this. You have to do this. But the truth was becoming harder to ignore. She was exhausted all the time. Her milk production was dropping because she wasn't eating enough. Ethan was fussy constantly. And she was making stupid mistakes, leaving traps unset, missing obvious animal signs, wasting ammunition on shots she should have known better than to take. The morning she found herself standing in front of an empty pantry, trying to remember if she'd already eaten breakfast or just thought about it, Clara realized something had to change. "All right," she said to Ethan. "New plan. We're going to visit Jacob." The ride down the mountain took 4 hours. Clara was out of practice with horses, and riding with a baby strapped to her chest made everything more complicated. But she managed, and by early afternoon, Jacob's homestead came into view. He spotted her from the corral and came running. "Clara, what's wrong? Is Ethan—" "We're fine. Clara dismounted, her legs shaking. "I need advice." Jacob's expression shifted from alarm to something softer. "Come inside. You look like you haven't slept in weeks." "I haven't." Inside, Jacob's cabin was smaller than Rowan's, but neater. A woman's touch was evident. Curtains on the windows, dried flowers in a vase. Clara felt a pang of something that might have been envy. "Where's your wife?" she asked. "Ellen's visiting her sister in Whitefish. Won't be back for another month." Jacob poured coffee, and Clara nearly wept at the smell. "Sit, talk." So Clara did. She told him about the sparse catches, about her exhaustion, about the growing fear that she was in over her head. "I can't afford to hire help," she said, "and I can't sell the land. I promised Rowan. But Jacob, I'm barely keeping us alive, and it's only February. What happens when spring comes and I need to plant, when summer comes and I need to harvest, when next winter comes and I need to have a year's worth of supplies put by?" Jacob was quiet for a long moment. Then, "You need to get tougher." Clara stared at him. "Excuse me?" "Not physically. You're already working yourself half to death. I mean mentally." Jacob leaned forward. "Clara, you're still thinking like a town woman. You're trying to do everything the way it should be done. Perfect trap sets, perfect pelts, perfect everything. But out here, perfect gets you killed. Good enough keeps you alive." "I don't understand. You're too careful. You're checking traps every single day because that's what Rowan did. But Rowan was healthy. You're not. You just had a baby." Jacob counted on his fingers. "You're worried about money, so you're trying to maximize every catch. But you're burning energy you can't afford to lose. You need to work smarter, not harder." Clara felt defensive anger rising. "What do you suggest? I just ignore half the traps?" "Yes, exactly that." Jacob's voice was firm. "Focus on the trap lines closest to the cabin. Let the far ones go until you're stronger. You'll catch less, sure, but you'll survive. And survival is the only thing that matters right now." "But if I don't make enough money, then you tighten your belt and make do. You've got Rowan's whole setup. You're not starting from nothing. You can afford one lean year." Jacob met her eyes. "But you can't afford to work yourself to death." Clara wanted to argue. She wanted to insist that she could handle it, that she didn't need to compromise. But sitting there, holding her coffee with shaking hands, she knew Jacob was right. "All right," she said finally. "I'll cut back on the far lines." "Good. And Clara?" Jacob's voice softened. "You're doing better than you think. Most people would have given up by now. The fact that you're still fighting means you're going to make it." Clara wasn't sure she believed him, but she wanted to, and for now, that was enough. She stayed for dinner, venison stew that tasted like heaven, then rode home in the dusk. The temperature was dropping again, and Clara hurried, not wanting to be caught on the trail after dark. She was halfway home when Ghost appeared. The wolf materialized from the trees like her namesake, falling into step beside Clara's horse. The horse skittered nervously, but Clara held him steady. "It's all right, boy. She's a friend. Sort of." Ghost accompanied them all the way to the cabin, then vanished into the night. Over the following weeks, Clara implemented Jacob's advice. She focused on the close trap lines and let the distant ones go unchecked. At first, it felt like failure. Every day she didn't check those traps was money left on the table. But Jacob had been right. The energy she saved made everything else easier. She had time to properly process the pelts she did catch, time to repair her equipment, time to sleep, And slowly, impossibly, Clara felt herself getting stronger. Her body adapted to the work. Her hands hardened until they were more callous than skin. Her legs grew accustomed to long hikes through snow. Her aim with the rifle improved. And Ethan, thriving on her milk, grew fat and healthy. By early March, Clara had caught enough pelts to meet her minimum needs. It wasn't the bounty Rowan would have managed, but it was survival. And survival, she was learning, was its own kind of victory. One morning, Clara woke to find the temperature had risen above freezing again. But this time, it stayed there. The snow began melting in earnest, revealing brown earth and dead grass. Spring was coming. Time to figure out planting, Clara told Ethan. She'd been dreading this. Rowan had shown her his garden plot before he died, but she'd paid more attention to hunting and trapping than agriculture. Now she wished she'd listened better. She found Rowan's planting notes in a ledger, dates, crop rotations, seed amounts. His handwriting was cramped and difficult to read, but Clara worked through it slowly. Potatoes first, then peas, then corn. Beans between the corn rows. Squash around the edges to discourage weeds. It sounded simple on paper. In practice, it was backbreaking. The ground was hard and full of rocks. Clara's hands, tough as they were, blistered from the shovel. And Ethan, who'd been so cooperative during the winter, decided spring was the perfect time to become colicky. "Perfect timing, kid," Clara muttered, bouncing him while trying to turn soil with one hand. "Really appreciate it." A week into planting, Jacob returned with Ellen. Ellen Brennan was small and fierce, with dark hair and sharp eyes that took in Clara's situation instantly. "You've been doing all this alone?" "Mostly," Clara admitted. Idiotic. But Ellen's tone was approving. "Come on, show me what you've planted so far." Ellen had grown up on a farm and knew twice as much about gardening as Clara had forgotten. She reorganized the garden plot, showing Clara how to maximize space and minimize work. She brought seeds Clara hadn't even known existed, herbs, medicinal plants, even flowers. "You need beauty too," Ellen said firmly. "Not just survival. Beauty keeps you sane." Over 3 days, the two women worked side by side. Ellen talked constantly, filling Clara in on valley gossip she hadn't known she craved. The Hendersons lost half their herd over winter. Pneumonia. Tom Henderson's beside himself. Mrs. Kettering's shop burned down in January. Some people say she was behind on rent and did it herself for the insurance, but who knows? There's a new family settling down by Eagle Creek. 3 boys, all of them marriage age. Ellen and Jacob are taking bets on which one Ellen's sister catches first. Clara found herself laughing, for the first time since Rowan's death. It felt strange and wonderful. On the 3rd evening, as they sat on the cabin porch watching the sunset, Ellen said, "You're going to make it, you know." Clara glanced at her. "What makes you so sure?" "Because you're still here. That's all it takes. Being too stubborn to quit." Ellen rocked Ethan, who'd finally stopped fussing. "Jacob told me about the trap lines, how you adjusted your strategy instead of killing yourself trying to do everything." "I didn't have a choice." "You did. You could have given up and gone back to Brass Creek, sold the land, remarried." Ellen met Clara's eyes. "But you didn't. That tells me everything I need to know about who you are." Clara was quiet for a moment, then, "Did you ever regret marrying Jacob? Coming out here to the middle of nowhere?" "Every winter." Ellen grinned. "Then spring comes, and I remember why it's worth it. The freedom, the space, the feeling that your life is actually yours." She handed Ethan back to Clara. "You'll feel it too eventually. That moment when you realize you're not just surviving anymore. You're living." Clara wanted to believe her, but right now survival still felt like a full-time job with no days off. Ellen and Jacob left the next morning, promising to return in a month. Clara watched them ride away, feeling the isolation settle back over her like a heavy coat. But it felt different now. Not crushing, exactly. Just present. April brought rain. Lots of it. The garden sprouted beautifully, but the trails turned to mud. Clara's trap lines became nearly impossible to check. She slipped constantly, came home covered in muck, and spent her evenings trying to dry everything by the fire. And then, one morning, men came. Clara heard the horses before she saw them. 3 riders dressed like townfolk, picking their way carefully up the mountain trail. She grabbed the rifle and stepped onto the porch. Ethan in his sling against her chest. The lead rider was tall and thin, with a severe face and expensive clothes that looked ridiculous out here. He reined in his horse at a careful distance, eyeing the rifle. "Mrs. Hale?" "Who's asking?" "My name is Cornelius Wade. I'm a land agent from Brass Creek." He pulled a document from his saddlebag. "I'm here regarding the property currently registered in the name of Rowan Hale, deceased." Claire's grip tightened on the rifle. "This is my land. I have the papers." "Yes, about that." Wade's smile didn't reach his eyes. "There seems to be some irregularity with the marriage certificate. We've received complaints that... Complaints from who? That's not relevant. What matters is that a woman alone with a child cannot reasonably be expected to maintain a property of this size. For your own safety, Mrs. Hale, we're prepared to offer you a fair price for... Get off my land!" Wade's smile vanished. "I understand you're upset, but Mrs. Hale, be reasonable. You can't survive out here alone. It's not appropriate for a woman to..." Clara raised the rifle, not quite pointing it at him, but making her intent clear. "I said, get off my land." One of the other riders moved his hand toward his belt. Clara swung the rifle to point directly at his chest. "Don't." For a long moment, nobody moved. Then Wade cleared his throat. "This isn't over, Mrs. Hale. We have legal grounds to challenge your claim. You'll be hearing from the territorial court. I'll be waiting." They rode away, but Clara knew this wasn't done. She stood on the porch long after they disappeared, her heart racing. They were coming for her land. She'd known it would happen eventually. A woman owning property was unusual enough to attract attention. A woman alone with no family, no connections? She was an easy target. Clara looked down at Ethan, sleeping peacefully against her chest. Then she looked out at the valley, at the mountains beyond, at everything Rowan had built and left her. "They think I'll just give this up," she said softly. "They think I'm weak." Ethan yawned, unconcerned with distant threats. "They're wrong." Claire went inside and found Rowan's strong box. Inside were all the papers, the marriage certificate, the land deed, Rowan's will. She read through them carefully, looking for anything those men might use against her. The marriage was legal, performed by a circuit judge, properly witnessed, filed with the territorial government. The deed was in Rowan's name, but the will transferred it to Clara and any children. Everything was in order. But Clara wasn't naive enough to think that mattered. The law said one thing, society said another. And when the two conflicted, society usually won. She needed to be ready to fight. Really fight. That night, Clara wrote 2 letters by firelight. The first was to Jacob, telling him what had happened and asking him to serve as a witness to her marriage if needed. The second was to a lawyer in Helena that Ellen had mentioned, a man who supposedly didn't mind taking on difficult cases. "Your mother's about to become very unpopular," she told Ethan as she sealed the letters. "Hope you're ready for that." Ethan grabbed her finger and gummed it happily. Clara took that as approval. The next morning, she rode down to Jacob's place to have him carry the letters to town. He took one look at her face and knew something was wrong. "What happened?" Clara told him. Jacob's expression grew progressively darker. "Wade," he spat. "That snake. He's been trying to grab up mountain properties for years, uses legal tricks to force people out, then resells at a profit." He looked at Clara. "You're going to fight this?" "Down to my last bullet if I have to." Jacob smiled grimly. "Good, because you're going to need that fight. Wade has friends in the territorial government. He's gotten away with this before. He's not getting away with it this time." "No," Jacob agreed. "He's not. Because you're not alone in this, Clara. Half the valley will stand with you. We're all tired of Wade and his kind." Clara felt something tight in her chest loosen slightly. "Thank you." "Don't thank me yet. This is going to get ugly." Jacob took the letters. "But ugly or not, you're in the right, and that has to count for something." After he left, Clara returned to the cabin and took stock of her situation. She had maybe 3 months before any legal action would happen. 3 months to make herself unassailable. 3 months to prove she could run this property as well as any man. "All right, Rowan," she said to the empty air. "You wanted me to build something? Let's build." Over the next weeks, Clara worked like someone possessed. She finished planting the garden. She repaired every piece of equipment on the property. She organized the pelts for sale. She even started improving things Rowan had left unfinished, A better smokehouse, a reinforced barn door, a new chicken coop. And she practiced shooting. Every evening, after Ethan was asleep, Clara would set up targets and fire until her shoulder ached. She'd been adequate before. Now she needed to be good. Better than good. Because if Wade or anyone else came back, she wanted them to look at her and see someone who could hold her ground. One evening, as she was cleaning the rifle, Ghost appeared at the tree line. The wolf had been scarce lately, probably busy with a den somewhere. But she was back now, watching Clara with those unsettling yellow eyes. "Hey girl," Clara called. "Miss me?" Ghost's tail moved, almost like a wag. Clara set down the rifle and walked to the edge of the porch. Ghost stayed where she was, maintaining that careful distance. But she didn't leave. "I could use your help, you know," Clara said. "If those men come back, you could look real fierce and scary. Make them think twice about messing with me." Ghost tilted her head, and Clara could swear the wolf understood. "Yeah, that's what I thought." Clara smiled despite everything. "We're both the same, aren't we? Just trying to survive in a world that doesn't want us." The wolf held her gaze for another moment, then melted back into the trees. Clara returned to her rifle cleaning, feeling oddly comforted. She wasn't completely alone. She had Jacob and Ellen. She had Ghost, in her strange way. She had Ethan, and she had herself. That would have to be enough. May came, warm and bright. The garden exploded with growth. Clara's chickens started laying. The spring hunt was good. She brought down 2 elk, enough meat to last months. And Ethan, 4 months old now, started smiling at her. That smile, toothless and pure, made every hard day worth it. "You're not going to remember any of this," Clara told him one evening, rocking him on the porch. "All these months I've been fighting to keep us alive. You won't remember being cold or hungry or scared, and that's good. That's how it should be." Ethan grabbed her nose and squealed with delight. "But I'll remember. I'll remember all of it. And someday, when you're older, I'll tell you about these days, about how we survived, how we fought." Clara kissed his forehead. "About how we won." Because they would win. Clara was sure of it now. Whatever Wade threw at her, whatever the courts decided, whatever society said, she would fight and she would win. The mountains had tested her and found her worthy. Now it was civilization's turn. The summons arrived in late June, delivered by a nervous young clerk who refused to meet Clara's eyes. She signed for it on the porch. Ethan balanced on her hip and watched the clerk ride away like his horse's tail was on fire. Territorial Court of Montana, case number 847, Cornelius Wade, petitioner versus Clara Hale. Respondent. Matter of property dispute and guardianship concerns. Clara read it twice, her jaw tightening with each word. Guardianship concerns. They weren't just coming for her land, they were coming for Ethan. "Like hell," she said. She rode to Jacob's that afternoon, the summons burning a hole in her saddlebag. Ellen met her at the door, took one look at Clara's face, and called for Jacob without asking questions. "They filed," Clara said, handing over the papers. "Hearings in 3 weeks. Helena." Jacob scanned the document, his expression darkening. "Guardianship concerns. That's new. What does it mean?" "It means Wade's playing dirty." Ellen took the papers from Jacob. "He's arguing you're an unfit mother, that Ethan would be better off in an orphanage or with a proper family." Her voice dripped contempt. "It's a pressure tactic. Make you choose between the land and your son." Clara felt cold. "They can't do that. He's mine." "They can try." Jacob's voice was grim. "And if the judge is sympathetic to Wade, which he might be because Wade has money and connections, they might succeed." "Then what do I do?" "You fight." Ellen handed the papers back. "You get the best lawyer you can afford, you gather every witness who'll speak for you, and you fight like your life depends on it. Because it does." Clara looked down at Ethan, who was chewing on her collar, oblivious to the threat hanging over both their futures. "I need that Helena lawyer, the one you mentioned. Thomas Brenner. He's expensive." "I'll pay whatever it takes." Clara met Ellen's eyes. "I'll sell every pelt I have. I'll mortgage the land if I have to. But I'm not losing my son." Ellen nodded slowly. "All right. Jacob can ride to Helena tomorrow, arrange a meeting. But Clara, you need to understand what you're walking into. Helena's not like Brass Creek. It's a real city, with real society ladies who'll look at you and see exactly what Wade wants them to see. A desperate mountain woman who doesn't belong. I know. Do you? Ellen's voice was gentle but firm. Because it's one thing to survive in the mountains. It's another to walk into a courtroom full of people who think women like us shouldn't exist. Clara thought of Mrs. Ketterine's pinched face, of all those years being invisible in Brass Creek, of every slight and dismissal she'd endured. Then she thought of these mountains, of everything she'd built and survived, of the person she'd become. Let them look, she said. I'm not the woman I was. Jacob left at dawn. Clara returned to her cabin and spent the next week preparing. She couldn't afford to let the property fall apart while she was gone, so she worked double time, harvesting early crops, smoking extra meat, reinforcing everything that might need repairs. She asked a neighbor 2 valleys over, an old trapper named Samuel who owed Rowan a favor, to check on the place while she was in Helena. Don't expect me to do much, Samuel said. He was maybe 70, with a face like weathered bark. But I'll make sure nothing burns down or gets stolen. That's all I need, thank you. Samuel studied her for a long moment. Rowan picked better than he knew. You got spine, girl. It was the closest thing to a compliment Clara had received in months. She'd take it. Ellen arrived a week before the hearing with a dress. Not just any dress, a proper city dress, dark blue wool with a high collar and modest sleeves. It was practical but respectable, the kind of thing a widow would wear. You can't walk into that courtroom looking like a mountain woman, Ellen said, laying it out on Clara's bed. Fair or not, they'll judge you by your appearance. You need to look like someone who belongs in polite society. Clara touched the fabric. It was softer than anything she'd worn in months. I don't know if I can pretend to be that person anymore. You're not pretending, you're just translating. Ellen adjusted the collar. You're still you. You're just speaking a language they'll understand. The dress fit, barely. Clara had lost weight over the winter, and her body was harder now, all lean muscle and sharp angles. But Ellen pinned and tucked until it looked presentable. One more thing. Ellen pulled out a small box. Inside was a simple gold wedding band. You need to wear this. Rowan didn't get you one, did he? No, there wasn't time. Well, now you have one. It was my mother's. Ellen slipped it onto Clara's finger. It fit perfectly. A widow without a wedding ring raises questions. This way no one can say the marriage wasn't real. Clara stared at the ring, feeling its weight. Such a small thing, but it made everything feel more real somehow, more permanent. Thank you, she said quietly. Thank me by winning. They left for Helena 4 days before the hearing. Clara, Ellen, Jacob, and Ethan, traveling in a wagon Ellen had borrowed. The journey took 3 days of hard driving, and by the time they reached Helena, Clara felt like she'd been beaten with sticks. Helena was bigger than she'd expected. Bigger than Brass Creek by a factor of 10, with actual paved streets and buildings that rose 3 stories high. People crowded the sidewalks, proper people, in proper clothes, looking at Clara's wagon with barely concealed disdain. Don't let them intimidate you, Ellen murmured. They're just people, same as anywhere. But they weren't, and Clara knew it. These were the people who made the rules, who decided what was acceptable and what wasn't. These were the people who could take Ethan away with a stroke of a pen. Thomas Brenner's office was on the 2nd floor of a brick building near the courthouse. The man himself was maybe 40, with sharp eyes and an even sharper suit. He looked Clara up and down when she entered, and she braced herself for judgment. Mrs. Hale, please sit. His voice was neutral, giving nothing away. I've reviewed your case file. It's problematic. How bad? Bad enough. Brenner spread papers across his desk. Wade is claiming that you obtained the marriage under false pretenses, that Rowan Hale was not of sound mind when he signed the contract, that you're an unfit mother living in dangerous isolation, and that the child would be better served by civilized guardianship. Clara's hands clenched. None of that is true. Truth doesn't matter as much as proof. Brenner's eyes met hers. Can you prove the marriage was legitimate? That Rowan was competent? That you're capable of raising a child alone in the wilderness? I have the marriage certificate, witnesses, the circuit judge who performed the ceremony. Good. That handles the marriage question. Brenner made a note. What about Rowan's mental state? He was dying, not insane. He knew exactly what he was doing. Can anyone testify to that? Jacob was there. He can testify that Rowan was lucid until the day he died. Also good. Another note. Now, the harder question, are you a fit mother? Clara looked down at Ethan, sleeping in her arms. I've kept him alive for 6 months in the mountains, alone. He's healthy, growing, happy. What more proof do they need? Proof that you're not just surviving, but thriving. Proof that you can provide not just food and shelter, but education, civilization, moral guidance. Brenner leaned back. Mrs. Hale, I'll be blunt. The court doesn't like women who step outside traditional roles. A widow running a mountain homestead alone raises concerns about propriety, safety, and the child's welfare. So what do? You make them see you're not just surviving, you're succeeding. You demonstrate competence, stability, and respectability. Brenner steepled his fingers. And you make it clear that removing Ethan from your care would harm him more than help him. How? Leave that to me. But Mrs. Hale, I need you to understand something. Brenner's voice grew serious. This isn't just about law. It's about power. Wade wants your land because it's valuable. He's using the child as leverage. If you show weakness, he'll exploit it. You need to walk into that courtroom like you own it. Clara thought of all those years in Brass Creek, making herself small, invisible. Then she thought of the mountains, of everything they'd taught her about strength. I can do that. Good, because you're going to need to. The next 3 days were a blur of preparation. Brenner drilled Clara on testimony, teaching her how to answer questions without volunteering information. Ellen helped her practice walking and sitting like a lady, not a mountain woman, and Jacob tracked down every witness they could find, the circuit judge, the lawyer who'd witnessed the contract, even the hotel clerk who'd seen Rowan the day before the wedding. The night before the hearing, Clara couldn't sleep. She lay in the boarding house bed, listening to Ethan's soft breathing, and felt fear claw at her chest. What if they took him? What if all her fighting wasn't enough? What if— Stop it, Ellen's voice came from the other bed. You're thinking too loud. I can't help it. Yes, you can. Ellen sat up. Clara, listen to me. I've known you for 3 months. In that time, I've watched you survive things that would break most people. You're not going to lose tomorrow. You don't know that. I do. Because you're too stubborn to lose. Ellen's silhouette moved in the darkness. And because you're right. That's your son, your land, your life. And no jumped-up land agent is going to take it from you. Clara wanted to believe her, but the fear wouldn't let go. What if I'm not enough? She whispered. What if being stubborn isn't enough? Then you make it enough. Ellen's voice was firm. You walk in there tomorrow and you show them who Clara Hale is. Not who you were in Brass Creek, not who they think you should be, who you actually are. Clara thought about that for a long time. Who was she? Not the invisible seamstress anymore. Not the desperate woman who'd agreed to a dying man's bargain. Someone else. Someone stronger. All right, she said finally. I'll try. Don't try. Do. Morning came too fast. Clara dressed carefully in Ellen's borrowed dress, pinned her hair into something resembling civilization, and looked at herself in the mirror. She looked strange, half mountain woman, half society lady. Neither and both. You look respectable, Ellen said. That's all that matters. The courthouse was imposing. Stone columns, high ceilings, the kind of building designed to make people feel small. Clara held Ethan close and walked in with her head up, refusing to be intimidated. The courtroom was already filling with spectators. Clara recognized some faces, Valley people who'd come to support her. But there were more strangers, curiosity seekers who'd heard about the case and come to watch the show. And there, in the front row, sat Cornelius Wade. He looked exactly as Clara remembered, thin, severe, expensive. When he saw her, he smiled slightly, not friendly. Victorious. Clara smiled back. She made sure he saw her do it, made sure he saw she wasn't afraid. Wade's smile faltered. All rise for the Honorable Judge Aldrich. The judge was older than Clara expected, maybe 60, with white hair and a face that gave nothing away. He took a seat, reviewed the papers before him, then looked up. Case number 847, Cornelius Wade versus Clara Hale. This is a property dispute with guardianship concerns. Mr. Wade, you may present your case. Wade's lawyer stood, a sleek man with an oiled mustache and a voice that filled the room. Your Honor, this is a simple matter of common sense and decency. My client, Mr. Wade, has brought to the court's attention a troubling situation. A woman, alone in the wilderness, claiming ownership of valuable property through a marriage of dubious legitimacy. Furthermore, this woman is attempting to raise a child in dangerous isolation with no access to education, medical care, or civilized society. He went on, painting Clara as either a con artist or a fool, possibly both, describing the mountains as if they were hell itself, making it sound like Ethan was living in squalor and ignorance. Clara's fingernails dug into her palms, but she kept her face neutral. Brenner had warned her about this. The other side would try to make her angry, make her react. She wouldn't give them the satisfaction. Finally, Wade's lawyer finished. Your Honor, we ask that the court recognize the marriage as invalid due to Mr. Hale's diminished capacity. Further, we ask that the child be removed from Mrs. Hale's custody and placed with a suitable family who can provide proper care. The courtroom murmured. Clara felt eyes on her, judging, weighing. Judge Aldrich turned to Brenner. Mr. Brenner? Brenner stood and his voice was calm, almost conversational. Your Honor, my client appreciates Mr. Wade's concern for her welfare. It's touching, really, that a land agent from Brass Creek cares so deeply about the well-being of a widow and her child. Sarcasm dripped from every word. Of course, one might wonder if his concern is motivated less by charity and more by the fact that Mrs. Hale's property is worth approximately $15,000 and sits on a lucrative trade route. The courtroom stirred. Wade's face reddened. Brenner continued. But let's address the claims. First, the marriage. We have the certificate properly executed and witnessed. We have testimony from the circuit judge who performed the ceremony. We have testimony from multiple witnesses that Rowan Hale was of sound mind until his death. There is no question of legitimacy. He pulled out documents, laying them on the judge's bench one by one. Second, Mr. Hale's capacity. We will present testimony showing that Mr. Hale was lucid, clear-minded, and fully aware of his actions. He made provisions for his wife and child with the same practical competence he'd shown throughout his life. More documents. Third, Mrs. Hale's fitness as a mother. Your Honor, in 6 months, Mrs. Hale has maintained a working homestead, provided for her child, and managed property that defeated lesser men. The child is healthy, well-fed, and thriving. There is no evidence of neglect or incompetence, only evidence that Mrs. Hale is, in fact, exceptionally capable. Brenner looked directly at Wade. What Mr. Wade calls dangerous isolation, most would call property ownership. What he calls dubious legitimacy, the law calls valid marriage. And what he calls concern for the child looks remarkably like a land grab disguised as charity. The murmuring grew louder. Judge Aldrich banged his gavel. Mr. Brenner, you'll have your chance to present evidence. Mr. Wade's counsel, call your first witness. What followed was 3 hours of testimony. Wade's side called a doctor who'd never met Clara, but was happy to opine that mountain living was dangerous for infants. A society woman from Helena who testified that proper children needed proper society. A land assessor who valued Rowan's property at precisely $15,000, exactly the amount Wade had mentioned in private conversations about purchasing it. Then it was Brenner's turn. He called the circuit judge first. The old man testified that the marriage had been legal in every particular, that Rowan had been clear-minded and determined, and that he'd never seen a more legitimate wedding despite its unusual circumstances. Then came Jacob. Mr. Brennan, you knew Rowan Hale. For 15 years, he was my neighbor and my friend. In the days before his death, did you observe his mental state? I did. He was dying, but his mind was sharp as ever. He knew exactly what he was doing when he married Clara. And why do you think he chose Mrs. Hale? Jacob looked directly at the judge. Because Rowan was a practical man. He needed someone strong enough to hold on to what he'd built, someone who wouldn't give up when things got hard. He chose Clara because she was the strongest person he could find. Thank you, Mr. Brennan. Then Ellen testified about Clara's competence as a mother, about the well-maintained cabin and healthy child. Samuel, the old trapper, testified that the property was in better condition now than it had been under Rowan. Even the hotel clerk testified that Rowan had seemed determined and focused, not addled or confused. Finally, Brenner called Clara herself. She stood, handed Ethan to Ellen, and walked to the witness stand on shaking legs. The courtroom felt like it held 1,000 eyes, all judging her. "Mrs. Hale," Brenner said gently, "tell the court about your marriage to Rowan Hale." Clara took a breath. Then she told them everything, the truth, unvarnished and direct. How she'd been desperate, how Rowan had offered her a way out, how they'd made a contract that was harsh but fair. "He didn't lie to me," she said. "He told me it would be hard, that I'd have to work, that I'd be alone when he died. He gave me a choice, and I chose to accept." "Why?" Clara looked at Wade, sitting there with his expensive suit and his superior smile. "Because I'd rather risk dying free than live safe as someone's servant. Because Rowan offered me something no one else would, a chance to build my own life. And because I was tired of being invisible." "How has it been, these past 6 months?" "Brutal." Clara didn't sugarcoat it. "I've been cold, exhausted, scared. I've made mistakes. I've barely survived some days. But I have survived. And so has my son. And that property, the property Mr. Wade wants so badly, is thriving under my care. What would happen to Ethan if you lost your land?" Clara's throat tightened. "I'd have nothing, no home, no income, no way to support him. We'd end up exactly where I was before, desperate and trapped, and I'd rather die than put my son through that." "Thank you, Mrs. Hale." Wade's lawyer stood for cross-examination, and Clara braced herself. "Mrs. Hale, you admit the marriage was a business transaction?" "Yes." "You didn't love Rowan Hale?" "Not at first, but I came to respect him, to care for him." Clara met the lawyer's eyes. "Love isn't always where you start. Sometimes it's where you end up. And yet you barely knew him when you married." "I knew he was honest. I knew he kept his word. That's more than most marriages start with." The lawyer's mouth tightened. "Mrs. Hale, is it appropriate for a woman to run a mountain homestead alone?" "Appropriate according to who?" "According to civilized society." "Then I guess I'm not civilized." Claire's voice was flat. "But my son is warm, fed, and loved. My property is productive. My word is good. If that's not civilized, I'll take savage any day." Someone in the gallery laughed. Judge Aldrich's gavel came down. "Mrs. Hale, do you believe you can provide your son with proper education?" "I can read and write. I'll teach him the same. And when he's old enough, I'll send him to school in Helena if that's what he wants. But first, I'll teach him how to survive, how to work, how to keep his word. Those are the lessons that matter. And if the court determines you're unfit," Clara looked at Ethan, then back at the lawyer, "then the court is wrong, and I'll fight that decision until my last breath." No further questions. Clara returned to her seat, her legs like water. Ellen squeezed her hand. "You did good," she whispered. Judge Aldrich called for closing arguments. Both lawyers spoke, but Clara barely heard them. She was too busy staring at Ethan, memorizing his face, just in case. Finally, the judge spoke. "This court will recess for deliberation. I'll render my decision in 1 hour." The longest hour of Clara's life. They waited in a side room, Clara, Ellen, Jacob, Brenner. No one spoke much. What was there to say? Either Clara would keep her son and her land, or she'd lose everything. Ethan fussed, and Clara nursed him, trying to memorize the weight of him, the smell of his hair, the way his tiny hand gripped her finger. "He's going to be fine," Ellen said. "You both are." Clara wanted to believe her, but the fear was a living thing in her chest, squeezing tighter with every passing minute. Finally, a clerk appeared. "The judge is ready." They filed back into the courtroom. Clara's heart hammered so hard she thought it might break through her ribs. Judge Aldrich looked down at them, his face unreadable. "I've reviewed the evidence and testimony," he said, "and I've reached a decision." Clara held her breath. "First, regarding the marriage, the evidence clearly shows that Rowan Hale was of sound mind when he married Clara Whitlock. The marriage was legal in every particular. This court finds no basis to invalidate it." Relief, sharp and sweet, but Aldrich wasn't done. Second, regarding the property, Mrs. Hale is the lawful heir under Rowan Hale's will. The property belongs to her, without question. Wade's face went purple. His lawyer started to rise, but Aldrich's glare stopped him. Third, and most importantly, regarding the child. The judge looked directly at Clara. Mrs. Hale, this court does not typically approve of women managing property alone. It is unconventional and raises legitimate concerns about stability and propriety. Clara's throat closed. However, Aldrich's voice softened slightly. The evidence shows that you have managed your property competently. Your child is healthy and well cared for. Multiple witnesses have testified to your capability, and frankly, the alternative, removing a thriving child from his mother to place him with strangers, serves no one's interest except Mr. Wade's. He banged his gavel. This court finds in favor of the respondent, Clara Hale. The property remains hers. The child remains in her custody. Mr. Wade's petition is denied in its entirety. Case dismissed. The courtroom erupted. Clara sat frozen, unable to process what she'd just heard. You won, Ellen said, grabbing her arm. Clara, you won! I won, Clara repeated numbly. Then it hit her, all at once. I won. She looked at Wade. He was already standing, his face twisted with fury, arguing with his lawyer. He caught Clara's eye and she saw it there, pure hatred. This wasn't over. Not really. Wade wouldn't just accept defeat. But right now, in this moment, Clara didn't care. She'd won. Outside the courthouse, Valley people swarmed her, congratulating, celebrating. Jacob lifted Ethan high, laughing. Ellen hugged her so tight Clara couldn't breathe. And Brenner, standing apart from the celebration, just nodded once. His job was done. Thank you, Clara said, approaching him. I don't know how to repay. You already did. You stood up for yourself. Brenner smiled slightly. That's payment enough. Besides, cases like yours are why I became a lawyer, to fight the Cornelius Wades of the world. Do you think he'll appeal? Probably. But he won't win. The law's on your side now. Brenner tipped his hat. Go home, Mrs. Hale. Raise your son. Build your life. That's the best revenge. They stayed in Helena one more night, celebrating at a restaurant Clara couldn't really afford. But she didn't care. Tomorrow she'd worry about money. Tonight, she'd celebrate freedom. The journey home took 4 days. They traveled slower, in no rush now. And when Clara finally saw her valley, her cabin, smoke rising from Samuel's caretaking fire, she felt something break open in her chest. Home, she said to Ethan. We're home. Samuel met her at the door. Heard you won. Good. Was getting tired of checking on this place. Everything all right? Everything's fine. You've got a letter, though. Came yesterday. He handed her an envelope. From Brass Creek. Clara's good mood dimmed slightly. She opened it. The letter was from the boarding house keeper, brief and to the point. Anne had died in February, peacefully, in her sleep. She was buried in the town cemetery, paid for by the money Rowan had left for her care. Clara read it twice, feeling nothing at first. Then, slowly, sadness crept in. Not overwhelming grief. Anne had been dying for years, but sadness nonetheless. The last connection to her old life, severed. Bad news? Ellen asked gently. My guardian died, months ago. Clara folded the letter carefully. I should have been there. You couldn't have been. You were here, surviving. I know, but still. Clara looked out at the mountains, gold in the evening light. She told me to build something worth remembering. I hope she'd be proud of what I'm building. I think she would be. That night, after Ellen and Jacob had left, after Samuel had gone home, Clara sat on her porch with Ethan and looked at her land. Her land. No one could take it now. It was hers by law, by sweat, by blood. Ghost appeared at the tree line as if summoned. The wolf sat, watching, her silver fur catching the last light. Hey, girl, Clara called softly. We won. Ghost's tail moved once. Then she stood and disappeared into the trees. Clara looked down at Ethan. He was 6 months old now, strong and healthy. He'd never remember this day, this fight, this victory. But she would. She'd remember all of it. Your father wanted me to build something, she told him. I think I'm doing it. one day at a time. Ethan yawned, utterly unconcerned with legacy and property rights. Clara laughed. Yeah, you're right. Tomorrow's problems are for tomorrow. Tonight, we just rest. She carried him inside to the cabin that was truly hers now, to the life she'd fought for and won, to the future she was building, one stubborn day at a time. The mountains had tested her. The law had tested her, and she'd passed both. But Clara knew, with bone-deep certainty, that more tests would come. The wilderness didn't care about court decisions. Winter didn't care about property rights. Survival was a daily choice, not a one-time victory. But tonight, she'd take the win. Tomorrow, she'd keep fighting, because that's what Clara Hale did. She fought. The victory lasted exactly 2 weeks. Clara was checking the eastern trapline when she smelled smoke. Not campfire smoke. This was thicker, darker, wrong. She turned toward the cabin and saw black plumes rising above the trees. Her heart stopped. Ethan was with Samuel at the cabin. Clara ran. Branches tore at her face and arms. Her lungs burned. She crashed through the undergrowth like a wounded animal, rifle banging against her back, one thought pounding through her mind. Ethan, Ethan, Ethan. She burst into the clearing and saw the barn engulfed in flames. Not the cabin. The barn. Samuel stood in front of the cabin porch, shotgun in hand, facing 3 mounted men. One of them was shouting, but Clara couldn't hear over the roar of blood in her ears. Get off my land! Samuel's voice carried across the clearing. Behind him, through the cabin window, Clara could see movement. Ethan was inside, safe. Clara raised her rifle and fired into the air. All heads turned. The mounted men's horses skittered nervously. Samuel's shoulders relaxed a fraction when he saw her. You Clara Hale? The lead rider called. He was young, maybe 25, with a cruel mouth and eyes that calculated odds. I am, and you're trespassing. Clara walked forward, rifle still raised. That fire an accident? Could be, the man smiled. Could be a warning. Mr. Wade sends his regards. Clara's finger tightened on the trigger. You tell Mr. Wade that if he sends any more warnings, I'll be sending one back, made of lead. Tough words for a woman alone. She's not alone. Jacob's voice came from the tree line. He emerged on horseback, rifle already aimed. And neither are you boys, so maybe you should think real careful about your next move. For a long moment, nobody breathed. Then the lead rider spat in the dirt. This ain't over. It is if you're smart. Clara didn't lower her rifle. Now get out. They went, but slowly, making it clear they weren't running, just choosing to leave. Clara watched until they disappeared down the trail, then ran to the barn. The fire had already consumed half the structure. The heat was intense, driving Clara back. Inside, she could hear animals screaming, her chickens, trapped in their coop. The water barrel! Samuel was already moving. We can save some of it. They fought the fire for 2 hours, bucket after bucket of water thrown at flames that seemed to laugh at their efforts. By the time they got it under control, the barn was a blackened skeleton. The chickens were dead. A winter's worth of stored hay was ash. Clara stood staring at the destruction, her face streaked with soot, her hands blistered raw. Could have been worse, Samuel said quietly. Could have been the cabin. This time, Clara's voice was flat. Next time it will be. Jacob came up beside her, his face grim. We need to get the sheriff involved. The sheriff's in Brass Creek, Wade's town. Clara turned to look at him. You think he'll care that Wade's hired thugs burned my barn? He has to. It's the law. The law didn't stop them from starting the fire. Jacob had no answer for that. That night, after Jacob left and Samuel went home, Clara sat on the porch with Ethan and tried to think. The barn could be rebuilt. She had Rowan's tools and enough timber in the woods. But rebuilding took time, and time meant vulnerability. Wade's men had proven they could reach her. They'd proven they weren't afraid to act, and they'd be back. Clara looked down at Ethan, now 7 months old, reaching for her face with chubby hands. She'd fought so hard to keep him, to keep this land. Was it worth risking both their lives over property? The question sat in her chest like a stone. Then she thought of Rowan, dying in his bed, asking her to promise she'd stay. She thought of Anne telling her to build something worth remembering. She thought of that courtroom where she'd stood and declared she'd rather die free than live trapped. Had she meant it? Yeah, she said aloud. I meant it. Ethan gurgled, unconcerned with his mother's declarations. Your mother's stubborn, Clara told him. Probably too stubborn for her own good. But that's what we've got, so we're going to use it. The next morning, Clara rode down to the valley. Not to Jacob's place, to the wider community, to the scattered homesteads and ranches that dotted the mountains. She visited every neighbor within a day's ride, telling them what had happened, asking for help. Most offered it immediately. These were people who understood that an attack on one homestead was an attack on all of them. If Wade could drive Clara out with impunity, he could do it to anyone. We'll organize patrols, said Henrik Jensen, a Norwegian settler with arms like tree trunks. Take turns watching each other's property. Wade's men show up, they'll find more than one rifle waiting. And we'll help rebuild your barn, added Maria Santos, a widow who ran a sheep ranch alone. Between all of us, we can have it up in a week. By the time Clara rode home, she had commitments from 12 families. It wasn't an army, but it was something. Proof she wasn't as alone as Wade thought. The barn raising happened the following Sunday. Neighbors came from across the valley, bringing tools and timber and food. They worked from dawn until dusk, and by evening Clara had a new barn. Not as nice as Rowan's had been, but solid enough. This is what community looks like, Ellen said, surveying the work. Wade can buy judges and hire guns, but he can't buy this. Clara looked at the dozen families scattered around her property, sharing food and stories. Children ran between the adults, laughing. Someone had brought a fiddle, and music drifted across the clearing. For the first time since the fire, Clara felt something other than fear. She felt hope, but hope was a fragile thing in Montana territory. 3 days later, Samuel didn't show up for his regular morning check. Clara waited until noon, then rode to his cabin. She found him on his porch, very dead, with a bullet hole in his chest. The sheriff came this time. Not because he cared, but because even in Montana, murder demanded attention. He poked around Samuel's cabin, asked questions with the enthusiasm of a man doing the bare minimum, then delivered his verdict. Looks like a robbery gone wrong. Old man probably surprised some drifters. Samuel was shot from the front, Clara said. At close range. That's not a robbery. That's an execution. You got proof? I've got common sense. Wade's been threatening me for months. Now someone who helps me turns up dead. You don't see a connection? The sheriff's face hardened. Careful, Mrs. Hale. Accusing a respected businessman of murder is serious. So is murder. Unless you've got evidence, there's nothing I can do. The sheriff mounted his horse. My advice? Sell your land and move on, before more accidents happen. Clara watched him ride away, her jaw so tight it ached. That night she barely slept. Every sound outside made her reach for the rifle. Every creak of the cabin made her check on Ethan. By dawn, she was exhausted and wired, her nerves stretched to breaking. This couldn't continue. She couldn't live like this, jumping at shadows, waiting for Wade's next move. She needed to change the game. The question was how. The answer came from an unexpected source. 2 weeks after Samuel's death, a stranger rode up to Clara's cabin. He was lean and weathered, maybe 50, with the look of someone who'd spent their entire life outdoors. He dismounted slowly, hands visible, making no threatening moves. Mrs. Hale, my name's Daniel Crow. I'm a federal marshal out of Helena. Clara's hand stayed on her rifle. What brings a federal marshal to my property? Samuel Monroe. Crow's face was expressionless. He was my friend. We served together in the war, stayed in touch after. When I heard he'd been killed, I came to ask questions the local sheriff didn't bother with. Like what? Like why a careful man who survived Antietam would let someone walk up and shoot him at close range. Crow's eyes were hard. Samuel was murdered, Mrs. Hale, and I think you know why. Clara studied him for a long moment. Then she lowered the rifle. Come inside. I'll tell you everything. She did. The whole story. Rowan's bargain, Wade's attempts to steal her land, the court case, the fire, Samuel's death. Crow listened without interrupting, his face revealing nothing. When she finished, he was quiet for a long time. Wade's connected, he said finally. Friends in the territorial government, money to hire lawyers and guns. Going after him directly will be hard, but not impossible. Nothing's impossible, just difficult. Crow met her eyes. I can investigate, gather evidence, But Mrs. Hale, you need to understand, this will take time, months maybe, and Wade won't sit idle while I work. So what do I do? Survive. Make yourself too expensive to kill. Crow stood. And trust that justice, slow as it is, still exists. It wasn't the reassurance Clara had hoped for, but it was something. After Crow left, Clara made a decision. She couldn't just wait for Wade to make his next move. She needed to go on offense. That evening, she rode to Wade's office in Brass Creek. She arrived after dark, when the streets were mostly empty. Wade's office was above the land agency, light spilling from his window. Clara tied her horse, checked her rifle, and climbed the stairs. She didn't knock, just opened the door and walked in. Wade was at his desk, reviewing papers. He looked up, startled, then his face twisted into something ugly. "Get out!" "No." Clara closed the door behind her. "We're going to talk." "I have nothing to say to you." "Then listen." Clara's voice was cold. "I know you killed Samuel. I know you burned my barn. I know you're trying to drive me off my land so you can steal it. You can't prove any of that. Not yet. But there's a federal marshal asking questions now, and sooner or later he'll find proof. When he does, you'll hang." Clara leaned forward. "But I'm willing to make you a deal." Wade's eyes narrowed. "What kind of deal?" "Leave me alone. Stop the threats, the fires, the murders. Let me live in peace on my land. Do that, and I'll convince the marshal to look elsewhere." "Why would I agree to that?" "Because if you don't, I'll make it my life's mission to destroy you." Clara's voice was flat, certain. "I've got nothing to lose, Wade. You've already taken everything you can, but you've got a reputation, a business, a life here. I'll burn all of it down if you keep pushing. You're bluffing. Try me." They stared at each other across the desk. Clara could see Wade calculating, weighing odds. He was a businessman. He understood cost-benefit analysis. Finally, he smiled. It wasn't pleasant. "You've got nerve, I'll give you that. Walking in here, threatening me." He leaned back. "But you're right. You're more trouble than you're worth. So here's my counteroffer. You stay on your mountain, I'll stay in town. We pretend the other doesn't exist." "And Samuel?" "An unfortunate accident. Nothing to do with me." Wade's voice was smooth, practiced. "I'm a respectable businessman, Mrs. Hale. I don't engage in violence." Liar, Clara thought. But she nodded slowly. "All right, we have a deal." "Do we?" Wade's smile widened. "Because deals require trust, and I don't trust you. The feeling's mutual, but we both trust self-interest." Clara moved toward the door. "You leave me alone because I'm too much trouble. I leave you alone because fighting you isn't worth my time. That's not trust. That's math." She left before Wade could respond, her heart hammering. Had she just made things better or worse? Impossible to know. But at least she'd acted. At least she'd stopped waiting for Wade to make the next move. The ride home was tense. Every shadow could hide a gunman. Every sound could be an ambush. But Clara made it back without incident, and that night she slept better than she had in weeks. Maybe the deal would hold. Maybe it wouldn't. But either way, Clara had drawn a line. Summer passed into fall. The garden produced well, and Clara spent long days canning and preserving. Ethan grew, started crawling, got into everything. And Wade kept his distance. The valley neighbors maintained their patrol rotation, watching each other's properties. No more fires, no more murders, just the slow turn of seasons and the endless work of survival. Clara started to relax, just a little. Then, October brought the first snow, early and heavy. Clara woke one morning to find 6 inches on the ground and more falling. Winter was coming fast. She spent the day preparing, checking the barn, securing the chicken coop, bringing in extra firewood. Ethan was 10 months old now, walking unsteadily, babbling in his own language. Clara had to watch him constantly to keep him from getting into trouble. "You're going to be a handful," she told him, pulling him away from the fire for the 3rd time. "Just like your mother." That night, she was reading by lamplight when she heard it, a scratch at the door. Not a knock. A scratch. Clara grabbed the rifle and approached carefully. "Who's there?" Another scratch. She opened the door a crack and found Ghost on the porch. The wolf looked terrible. Her silver fur was matted with blood, one ear torn, a gash across her shoulder still bleeding. She looked at Clara with those yellow eyes, then collapsed. Oh, hell. Clara set the rifle aside and knelt. Ghost's breathing was shallow, rapid. Whatever had done this, bear, mountain lion, another wolf, had nearly killed her. Clara knew she should let nature take its course. Ghost was wild. Saving her could turn her dependent, ruin whatever made her a wolf in the first place. But Clara had never been good at doing what she should. She dragged Ghost inside, leaving a blood trail across the floor. Ethan stared, fascinated, as Clara cleaned and bandaged the wolf's wounds using techniques Rowan had taught her for injured animals. "This is stupid," Clara muttered as she worked. "You're a wild animal. You should be healing in the woods, not my cabin." Ghost's eyes followed her movements, but she didn't snap or struggle, just lay there, accepting help. Clara got her cleaned and bandaged, then made a bed by the fire. Ghost didn't eat, couldn't probably, but she drank water when Clara offered it. "You stay here tonight," Clara said. "Tomorrow, if you're stronger, you go back where you belong." But Ghost stayed 3 days. On the 4th morning, Clara woke to find her gone. The door somehow nudged open. The bandages were scattered across the floor, blood-stained but empty. Clara stepped onto the porch and saw Ghost at the tree line, watching. Their eyes met for a long moment. Then the wolf turned and vanished into the forest. "You're welcome," Clara called after her. She didn't expect to see Ghost again. Wild animals, once injured, rarely returned. But a week later, Clara found a dead rabbit on her porch. Then a grouse. Then another rabbit. Ghost was hunting for her, bringing gifts. "You don't owe me anything," Clara said to the empty forest. But the gifts kept coming. Winter deepened. Clara settled into familiar rhythms, trap lines, hunting, caring for Ethan, fighting the cold. This winter was easier than the last. She knew what to expect now, knew how to pace herself, how to conserve energy, how to survive. Ethan's first birthday passed quietly. Clara made a small cake from precious sugar and let him destroy it with his hands. He laughed, delighted, covered in frosting, and Clara felt her heart crack open with love so fierce it hurt. "Happy birthday, little man," she whispered. "You've made it a year. That's something worth celebrating." She thought about Rowan, who'd never seen his son turn one, who'd never know how strong and healthy the boy had grown. It still hurt, that absence, probably always would, but Clara was learning to carry grief alongside joy, to hold both at once without letting either consume her. In January, Marshal Crow returned. "I've been investigating," he said, sitting in Clara's cabin, warming his hands by the fire. "Wade's operation runs deep, land fraud, intimidation, suspected murder, but he's careful. Everything's done through intermediaries. Nothing traces directly back to him. So he gets away with it. For now. But I'm building a case. It'll take time, but I'll get him eventually." Crow looked at her. "How have things been here?" "Quiet. Wade's kept his word so far." "Good. Keep it that way." Crow stood. "One more thing. I found some of Samuel's papers. Turns out he owned the land his cabin was on. No heirs, no will. It'll go to territorial auction unless someone claims it." Clara's mind worked fast. "How much land?" 160 acres bordering your eastern property line. That land would give Clara control of the entire Upper Valley. It would also cost money she didn't have. "When's the auction?" "March." Crow studied her. "You thinking about buying it?" "Maybe, if I can afford it." After Crow left, Clara did calculations. She had pelts to sell, some savings from the summer garden. If she trapped hard this winter, if she sold everything she could spare, she might have enough. It would leave her with no cushion for emergencies. One bad break and she'd lose everything. But that land would secure her position, give her room to grow, make it impossible for anyone to squeeze her out. Clara looked at Ethan, playing with wooden blocks Rowan had carved, building and destroying, building again. "Your mother's about to do something risky," she told him. "Hope you're okay with that." Ethan knocked over his blocks and laughed. Clara took that as permission. She trapped like someone possessed that winter. Every day, regardless of weather, she was out on the lines. She caught marten and fox, beaver and lynx. Her fingers froze, her feet went numb, but she kept going. By February, she had more pelts than she'd ever had. Enough to maybe, possibly, afford Samuel's land. The auction was in Brass Creek, which meant facing Wade's territory. But Clara went anyway. Ethan strapped to her back, her money carefully hidden. The auction house was crowded with speculators and settlers. Clara recognized several of Wade's men in the crowd. Wade himself sat in the front row, looking supremely confident. The auctioneer started the bidding at $50. It climbed quickly. 75, 100, 150. Clara stayed quiet, watching, waiting. At 200, most bidders dropped out. At 250, only 3 remained: Clara, Wade, and a Denver speculator in an expensive suit. The speculator bid 300. Wade bid 325. Clara bid 350. Wade turned to look at her, his expression calculating. Then he bid 400. Clara's heart sank. She had $380 total. If Wade went higher, she was done. She bid 375, pushing her limit. Wade smiled. 450. The auctioneer looked at Clara. Do I hear 475? Clara's mind raced. She could mortgage her land, maybe. Borrow from Jacob. But both options would leave her vulnerable, dependent. She opened her mouth to bid, but before she could speak, someone else did. 500. Clara turned. Marshall Crowe stood at the back of the room, holding a thick envelope. Wade's face went dark red. 600. 700. Crowe's voice was calm. 800. $1,000. Crowe walked forward, envelope in hand. Cash. Right now. The room went silent. Wade looked like he might explode, but even he couldn't match $1,000 in cash. Sold! The auctioneer banged his gavel. To the gentleman for $1,000. Clara stared as Crowe paid and collected the deed. Then he walked over to her and handed it over. What? How? Samuel left some money. More than anyone knew. He wanted it to go to his land to make sure it didn't fall into the wrong hands. Crowe smiled slightly. His will specified that if you wanted to buy the land, the money should help. Consider it Samuel's last gift. Clara looked down at the deed in her hands. 160 acres, now hers. Combined with Rowan's 1,500, she controlled 1,660 acres of prime Montana mountain land. She was no longer just surviving, she was thriving. Wade stormed out of the auction house without a word. Clara watched him go, feeling no triumph, just relief. Outside, in the cold February air, Clara held Ethan close and looked at the deed. We did it, kid. We actually did it. Ethan grabbed the paper and tried to eat it. Yeah, I know. It's just paper. But it's our paper, our land, our future. Clara kissed his forehead. And nobody's taking it from us. She rode home through the snow, the deed safely tucked away, and felt something she hadn't felt in a long time. Peace. Not permanent peace. Clara wasn't naive enough to believe that existed. Wade was still out there, still dangerous. Winter was still harsh. Life was still hard. But for now, in this moment, she had won another battle. And that was enough. Spring came late that year, but when it arrived, it brought change with it. Clara was planting the garden when she saw riders coming up the valley. Not Wade's men. She knew their silhouettes by now. These were different. Official. Marshall Crowe led them, accompanied by 4 federal deputies and a man in a suit who had lawyer written all over him. Clara wiped dirt from her hands and met them in the yard. Ethan was nearby, digging in the mud with a stick, babbling to himself. Mrs. Hale. Crowe dismounted. I need to speak with you, privately. They went inside. The lawyer spread papers across Clara's table while Crowe explained. We've arrested Cornelius Wade. Charges include land fraud, conspiracy to commit murder, arson, and about a dozen other crimes. Crowe's face was grim satisfaction. He'll hang if convicted, which he will be. Clara felt nothing at first. Then, slowly, relief washed over her. How did you finally get him? One of his hired men turned on him, got scared after Samuel's death, decided to save his own neck. Gave us everything. Dates, payments, orders Wade gave directly. The lawyer tapped the papers. It's ironclad. Wade's finished. What does this mean for me? It means you're safe. Wade had arrangements with several other land agents, but they've scattered now that he's arrested. No one's going to come after your property. Crowe paused. It also means you'll need to testify at his trial. Clara had expected this. When? June. Helena? The lawyer looked up. Mrs. Hale, I won't lie to you. Wade's lawyers will try to discredit you. They'll bring up the circumstances of your marriage, your lifestyle, anything they can use to make you look unreliable. Let them try. Clara's voice was flat. I've survived worse than lawyers. The trial took 3 weeks. Clara testified on the 4th day, telling the jury everything, the threats, the fire, Samuel's murder. Wade's lawyer tried to rattle her, but Clara had faced down mountain lions and killing winters. A man in an expensive suit didn't scare her. The jury deliberated for 2 hours and came back with guilty verdicts on all counts. Wade was sentenced to hang. Clara watched from the gallery as they led him away. He looked at her once, his face twisted with hatred, and mouthed something she couldn't hear. Probably didn't want to. It's over, Crow said afterward, finding her outside the courthouse. Really over this time. Is it? Clara looked at the mountains in the distance, at the sky that seemed to go on forever. Or is this just the end of one thing and the start of another? Crow smiled slightly. You're learning. Nothing's ever really over, but this chapter? Yeah, this one's closed. Clara rode home alone, Ethan asleep in the sling against her chest. The valley looked different somehow. Safer. Like a weight had been lifted from the land itself. When she reached the cabin, Ghost was waiting at the tree line. The wolf looked healthy now, her coat thick and glossy. She'd given birth recently. Clara could tell by the way she held herself, the protective wariness in her eyes. You've got pups, Clara said. Congratulations. Ghost's tail moved almost like a wag. Then she turned and melted into the trees. Clara smiled. Even the wolves were moving on. That summer was the best Clara had known since coming to the mountains. The garden exploded with growth. Her trapline stayed productive. Ethan grew strong and wild, running through the meadows, learning to recognize animal tracks, absorbing everything Clara taught him. And slowly, carefully, Clara started building something beyond survival. She used Samuel's land to expand her operation, built a second cabin there as a line camp for when she worked the distant traps, cleared fields for hay, started planning for livestock, real livestock, not just chickens. Cattle, maybe, or horses. Jacob and Ellen visited regularly, bringing news from the valley and beyond. Montana was changing, more settlers arriving every year, towns growing, the railroad pushing closer. You should think about the future, Jacob said one evening, sitting on Clara's porch while their children played in the yard. Ellen had given birth to twins that spring, and they tumbled around with Ethan like puppies. What happens when Ethan's older? He'll need schooling, other children, opportunities beyond trapping. I know. Clara had been thinking about this. But not yet. He's still so young. Time moves fast out here. Ellen watched the children with a soft expression. Feels like yesterday we were planning your wedding. Now look at you. Look at all of us. Clara looked at her hands, scarred, calloused, strong. Hands that had sewn wedding dresses and set trap lines, delivered a baby and fired a rifle, hands that had built a life from nothing. I barely recognize myself sometimes, she admitted. That's growth. Ellen smiled. The girl who married Rowan wouldn't have survived what you've been through, but the woman you've become, she can survive anything. Maybe. Clara wasn't sure about anything anymore, except that she was still here, still fighting, still building. Fall came, and with it, a surprise visitor. Clara was splitting wood when a wagon rolled up. An old woman sat in the driver's seat, her face weathered but sharp-eyed. Behind her, the wagon was packed with supplies and furniture. You Clara Hale? The woman called. I am. Name's Margaret Brennan. I'm a teacher, retired technically, but I heard through my nephew that there's families up this valley with children who need educating. She looked around appraisingly. I'm told you've got the most central property and the best cabin for hosting. That true? Clara blinked. Nephew? Jacob Brennan. Tall boy, married to that sharp-tongued Mexican girl. Margaret smiled. He wrote me about you. Said you'd probably need convincing, so I came in person. Convincing for what? To let me start a school. Here, on your property. Margaret climbed down from the wagon with surprising agility for her age. I've taught for 40 years, Mrs. Hale. I'm good at it. And these mountain children deserve better than growing up ignorant. Clara thought about Ethan, about the promise she'd made in that courtroom to provide him with education. I can't pay you. Don't need paying. I've got my pension. and I'm too stubborn to die idle. Margaret looked at the cabin, the barn, the cleared land. You've built something solid here, something worth protecting. Education's part of that protection. Clara studied the old woman. She looked tough as dried leather and twice as durable. The kind of person who'd survive Montana winters without complaint. All right, Clara said, but you'll need your own cabin. I'm not sharing mine. Already thought of that. I'll take that line camp you built on the eastern property. Jacob says it's got good bones. Margaret stuck out her hand. We have a deal? Clara shook it. We have a deal. By winter, the valley had its first school. Margaret taught 8 children in the line camp cabin, which Clara had helped weatherproof and furnish. Ethan was still too young for formal lessons, but he sat in sometimes, absorbing knowledge like a sponge. That boy's sharp, Margaret told Clara one day. Takes after his mother. His father was smart too. Then he got the best of both. Margaret looked at Clara over her spectacles. You know, Jacob told me your story. The marriage contract, the court case, all of it. Clara tensed. And I think you're one of the bravest women I've ever met. Not because you survived the wilderness, plenty of fools can survive if they're stubborn enough, but because you chose to build something instead of just enduring. That takes real courage. Clara didn't know what to say to that, so she said nothing. That winter was hard but manageable. Clara had learned the rhythm of mountain seasons now. She knew when to push and when to rest, when to work and when to wait. Ethan turned 2, then 2.5. He was talking in full sentences now, asking endless questions. Mama, why is snow cold? Because it's frozen water. Why is water frozen? Because it's winter. Why is it winter? Clara laughed. Because the world turns and the seasons change. That's just how it works. Oh. Ethan considered this, then, can I eat snow? Small amounts won't hurt you, but it won't fill you up. He ran outside to test this theory, and Clara watched from the porch, smiling. Rowan should have seen this, should have seen his son growing strong and curious and wild. But Rowan was gone, and Clara had stopped dwelling on what should have been. She'd learned to live in what was. Spring brought another surprise. Ghost returned with her pups. There were 3 of them, maybe 4 months old, tumbling and playing at the tree line. Ghost watched them carefully, but she let them approach the cabin. Let them investigate this strange human dwelling. Ethan was fascinated. Mama, puppies! They're wolf pups, not puppies. Don't try to touch them. But one of the pups, a bold little male with silver fur like his mother, crept closer, sniffing curiously. Ethan held very still, and the pup came right up to him, touching noses. Clara reached for her rifle, but Ghost made no move to attack. She just watched, calm and alert. The pup licked Ethan's face. Ethan giggled. Mama, he likes me. I see that. Clara lowered the rifle slowly. But he's still wild. Remember that. The pups visited regularly after that. Ghost kept them at a distance, never let them get too comfortable, but she allowed the contact, like she was teaching them that not all humans were threats, that some could be trusted. Or maybe Clara was reading too much into it. Maybe Ghost was just a wolf doing wolf things, and Clara was projecting human meaning onto animal behavior. Either way, Ethan grew up playing at the edges of the wolf pack's territory, and the wolves grew up knowing him. It was strange and magical and probably dangerous, but Clara allowed it. The mountains had their own rules, and this felt right somehow. Summer brought prosperity. Clara's trap lines had never been more productive. Her garden overflowed. She'd traded for 3 cows and a bull, and they were thriving on the mountain grass. The school was full, with 2 more families having moved into the valley specifically because education was available. You've built a community, Ellen said, helping Clara can vegetables one hot July afternoon, whether you meant to or not. I didn't mean to. I just wanted to survive. Same thing sometimes. Ellen sealed a jar. You survived, and in surviving, you created space for others to do the same. That's leadership. Clara didn't feel like a leader. She felt like someone who'd gotten lucky and stubborn in equal measure. But she couldn't deny that things had changed. The valley was more settled now, safer, connected. In August, Clara made a decision. She hired a carpenter from Helena to build a proper house on her land. Not a cabin, a house. 2 stories with real windows and a kitchen separate from the main room. Room for Ethan to grow. Room for the life she was building. The construction took 3 months. By November, the house stood complete, solid and beautiful, overlooking the valley Clara had fought so hard to keep. They moved in on a cold, clear day. Ethan ran through the empty rooms, his footsteps echoing, delighted by all the space. Clara stood in the kitchen and felt something shift in her chest. She'd done it, actually done it, built something permanent, something that would outlast her. "What do you think, Rowan?" she said to the empty air. "Did I do right by your land?" No answer came, but Clara hadn't expected one. Rowan was dead and gone. This place was hers now, truly hers. Not inherited, not borrowed. Hers. Winter came and went, then spring again. The cycle continued as it always did. Ethan turned 3, then 4. He started formal lessons with Margaret, proving to be as sharp as the old teacher had predicted. He learned to read, to write, to do arithmetic, and in the afternoons, Clara taught him everything Rowan had taught her: tracking, trapping, hunting, survival. "Why do I need to know all this?" Ethan asked one day, struggling to reset a trap. "Because knowledge is power," Clara said. "The more you know, the more choices you have. Never limit yourself." "Did you know all this stuff when you were little?" "No, I learned it later. Your father taught me." Ethan was quiet for a moment. He'd grown up with stories of Rowan, but no memories. Sometimes Clara wondered if that was better or worse. "I wish I could have met him," Ethan said finally. "Me too. He would have liked you." Clara helped him get the trap set properly. "He wanted you to grow up strong and free. That's why he made sure we'd have this land, so you'd have choices." "What kind of choices?" "Any kind you want. You can stay here and run these trap lines. You can go to Helena and become a businessman. You can go east and become a scholar." Clara looked at her son. "The point is, you get to choose. That's what freedom means. What did you choose?" Clara thought about that seamstress in Brass Creek, invisible and trapped. Then she thought about the woman she'd become, scarred, strong, free. "I chose to fight," she said, "and I'd make the same choice again." 5 years after Rowan's death, Clara stood on the ridge where he was buried and looked out over her valley. The house stood solid and strong. The school had expanded to 2 rooms. The valley held 20 families now, all connected by mutual support and shared struggle. And Clara Hale, once invisible, was now a name people knew. The widow who'd fought off land grabbers, the woman who'd survived alone in the mountains, the mother who'd built a community from nothing. "I kept my promise," Clara said to Rowan's grave. "I stayed. I built something. I made them remember." She placed wildflowers on the grave, the same kind that had bloomed the spring Rowan died. Then she walked back down to her house, where Ethan was waiting. "Ready to check the north lines?" he asked. He was 5 now, tall for his age, with his father's dark hair and his mother's stubborn chin. "Ready?" Clara grabbed her rifle. "Let's go." They walked together through the forest, and Clara taught him how to read signs in the earth, how to predict where animals would travel, how to respect the wilderness while making it provide. Ghost appeared briefly, watching from a distance. Her pups were grown now, starting families of their own. The wolf was older, grayer, but still strong. "Hi, Ghost," Ethan called. The wolf's ears pricked forward, then she turned and disappeared. "Do you think she remembers us?" Ethan asked. "I think so. In her way." Clara smiled. "We helped each other once. That kind of thing sticks." They checked the traps. 3 marten, good catches, and headed home as the sun began to set. The mountains glowed gold and purple in the fading light, impossibly beautiful, impossibly harsh. "Mama," Ethan said as they walked, "are you happy?" Clara thought about that question. Was she happy? She'd lost so much, her youth, her innocence, her easy dreams of what life should be. She'd gained scars and calluses and the kind of bone-deep exhaustion that never quite went away. But she'd also gained herself, her strength, her freedom, her son. "Yeah," she said finally, "I am." "Good." Ethan slipped his hand into hers. "I'm happy too." They walked home together through the twilight, and Clara felt complete in a way she never had before. Not because everything was perfect, it wasn't. Not because the struggle was over, it never would be. But because she'd chosen this life, fought for it, built it with her own hands. And that made all the difference. 10 years after marrying Rowan, Clara stood on her porch and watched her valley wake up. Smoke rose from a dozen cabins. Children's voices drifted on the morning air. The school bell rang, calling students to lessons. Ethan was 9 now, already showing signs of the man he'd become. He worked the trap lines with skill, read voraciously, asked questions that challenged even Margaret's vast knowledge. And he was happy, truly happy, in a way Clara had never been as a child. That alone made everything worth it. Jacob and Ellen visited that afternoon, bringing news from Helena. Montana was pushing for statehood. The railroad had reached Brass Creek. The territorial governor was talking about land grants for established settlers. "You'd qualify," Jacob said. "You've been here over 10 years, improved the land, built a community. You could get another 500 acres free and clear." "I've got enough land," Claire said. But she smiled. "Though I won't say no to having it official." "You've come a long way," Ellen said. "Remember that scared woman who showed up at my door asking for gardening help?" "I wasn't scared. I was terrified," Clara laughed. "Difference is, I didn't let the fear stop me. That's the Clara Hale I know." Ellen raised her coffee cup. "To surviving, to building, to being too stubborn to quit." They drank to that. As the sun set, Clara found herself back at Rowan's grave. She came here less often now, not because she'd forgotten, but because she'd made peace. The grief had softened into something gentler, memory without the sharp edges. "Ethan's doing well," she told the grave. "Smart as hell and twice as stubborn. He's got your practical mind and my refusal to quit. It's a dangerous combination." The wind whispered through the pines, carrying the scent of approaching autumn. "I'm doing well too, in case you're wondering. The land's thriving, the community's growing, and I'm—" Clara paused, searching for the right word. "I'm free. That's what you gave me, Rowan. Freedom. I don't know if you realized it at the time, but that contract wasn't just about land or heirs. It was about giving me a choice, a chance to be someone." She touched the weathered cross. "I became someone I'm proud of. So thank you for seeing what I couldn't see in myself, for trusting me with your legacy, for giving me Ethan." Clara stood, brushing dirt from her knees. "I'll keep building, keep fighting. That's what I do. And someday, when I'm gone, Ethan will stand here and tell his own stories about his mother who refused to quit, his father who gave her a chance, the land that tested them both and found them worthy." She looked out over the valley one last time at everything they'd built together, she and Rowan and all the others who'd chosen this hard, beautiful life. "We did good," Clara said. "We did real good." Then she walked back down to her house, to her son, to the life she'd fought so hard to create. The mountains rose around her, eternal and indifferent, beautiful and brutal. Clara Hale had arrived in these mountains as a desperate woman with nothing to lose. She'd survived winters that should have killed her. She'd fought men who wanted to destroy her. She'd built a life from grief and grit and stubborn determination. And she'd won. Not because the struggle was over. It would never be over. The mountains didn't work that way, but because she'd proven something essential, that courage and stubbornness could forge a life worth living. That a woman dismissed by society could build something society couldn't ignore. That legacy wasn't about where you started, but what you built with the time you had. Years would pass. Ethan would grow into a man, strong and capable, running the trap lines with the same skill his father had possessed. He'd tell his own children about his mother, the seamstress who became a legend, the woman who refused to be invisible, the fighter who built a community in the wilderness. And Clara's name would live on, passed down through generations. Not as a perfect hero, but as something better. A real person who'd faced impossible odds and refused to quit. Who'd loved fiercely and fought harder. Who'd taken a dying man's desperate bargain and transformed it into a lasting legacy. The mountains would remember her. The valley would remember her. And long after she was gone, people would still tell stories about Clara Hale, the woman who came to Montana with nothing and built an empire from stubbornness and snow. But that was the future. Right now, in this moment, Clara was simply a woman standing on her porch, watching the sun set over land that belonged to her, surrounded by the life she'd built. And that was enough. More than enough. It was everything.